Chapter 28 of The Young Stepmother by Charlotte Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. The family office had been asked to receive the whole party on their return. Mr. Kendall had business in London and could not bear to part with the colonel till he had seen him safely lodged and heard the surgeon's opinion. Mr. Ferrars was laying himself out to guard his brother-in-law from being oppressed by the sympathetic welcome of the good aunts. But though the good ladies never failed in kindness, all the excess was directed into a different channel. Albinia herself was but secondary to the wounded hero, for whom alone they had eyes and ears. They would hardly let him stand erect for a moment. Easy chairs and couches were offered, soup and wine, biscuits and coffee were suggested, and questions were crowded on him, while he, poor fellow, wistfully gazed at the oft-directed pile of foreign letters on the side table, and in pure desperation became too fatigued to go down to luncheon. When the others returned, he was standing on the rug, curling his mustaches. There was a glow of color on his hollow cheek, and his eyes danced. He put out his hand, and catching Albinia's with boyish playfulness, he squeezed it triumphantly, with the words, "Albinia, she's a brick." They went their several ways, Fred to rest, Morris to make an appointment for him with the doctor, and Albinia to Genevieve, whom Mr. Kendall regarded like his son's widow, forgetting that the attachment had been neither sanctioned nor returned. He could not rest without seeing her and delivering that last message, but he was glad to have the way prepared by his wife, and proposed to call for her when his law business should be over. Albinia sent in her card, and asked whether Miss Durrant were at liberty. Genevieve came hurrying to her with outstretched hands. "Dear Mrs. Kendall, this is kind," and led her to the back drawing-room, where they were with one impulse enfolded in each other's tearful embrace. "Oh, madam, how much you have suffered!" "You know all," said Albinia. "Oh no, very little. My aunt knows little of Bayford now, and her sight is too weak for much writing." Genevieve pushed back her hair. She looked ill and heavy-eyed, with the extinguished air that sorrow gave her. Gilbert had distressed, perplexed her, and driven her from home, but what could be remembered, save the warm affection he had lavished on her, and the pain she had inflicted? Uneasiness and sorrow, necessarily unavowed, had preyed on the poor girl for weeks in secret, and even now she hardly presumed to give way. Relief, almost luxury, as it was to be pressed in those kind arms and suffered to weep freely for the champion of her younger days. When she had heard how he had thought of her to the last, her emotion grew less controllable, and Albinia was touched by the idea that there had all along been a stifled preference. Embellished as Gilbert now was, she could not but wish to believe that his affection had not been wasted, and his constancy might well be touching in one of the heroes of the 600. At least, Genevieve had a most earnest and loving appetite for every detail, and though the afternoon was nearly gone, neither felt as if half an hour had passed when admittance was asked for Mr. Kendall. It was a trying moment, but Genevieve was too simple, genuine, and grateful to pause in selfish embarrassment. Had she toyed with Gilbert's affection, she could not have met his father with such maidenly modesty and sweet sympathy and respect in her blushing cheek and downcast tearful eyes. He took her hand, speaking in the kindest tone of his mellow voice. My dear, Mrs. Kendall has told you what brings us here, and how much we feel for you and with you." "So kind in you," said Genevieve, faltering. "Poor child, she has suffered grievously for want of fuller tidings," said Albinia. "She has been keeping her sorrow pent up all this time." "She has acted, as she has done throughout, most consistently," said Mr. Kendall. "My dear, though it was inexpedient to show my sentiments, I always respected my son for having placed his affections so worthily, and though circumstances were unfortunately adverse, I cannot thank you enough for your course of action and the influence you exercised." "I never did," murmured Genevieve. "Not perhaps consciously, but unswerving rectitude of conduct is one of the strongest earthly influences. He was sensible of it. He bade me tell you that whenever higher and better thoughts came to him, you were connected with them; and when, to his surprise, poor boy, he found that he was thought to have distinguished himself, his first thought was that it might be a step to your esteem. He desired me to thank you for all that you have been to him, to entreat you to pardon the annoyance of which he was the occasion, and to beg you to wear this for his sake, if you could think of his presumption with forgiveness and toleration. Those were his words, but I trust you do not retain displeasure, for though perhaps foolishly and obtrusively expressed, it was sincere and lasting affection." "Oh, sir," exclaimed Genevieve, "do not speak thus. What can I feel save that it will be my tenderest and deepest pride to have been so regarded? Oh, that I could thank him! But," clasping her hands together, "I cannot even thank you." "The best way to gratify us," he said, "will be to always remember that you have a home at Willow Lawn, and a daughter's place in our hearts. Think of me like a father, Genevieve." And he kissed her drooping forehead. "Oh, Mr. Kendall, this is goodness." He turned to Albinia to suggest, "It must be intolerable to be here at present. Speak to Mrs. Rainsforth. Let us take her home, if it be but for a week." Leaving him to make the proposition to Genevieve, Albinia gained admittance to the other drawing room, which she found all over with little children, and their mother looking unequal to dispensing with their deputy. She said she had feared Miss Durrant was looking ill, and had something weighing on her spirits, though she was always so cheerful and helpful. But baby had not been well, and Mr. Rainsforth was not at all strong, and her views had evidently taken no wider range. Albinia began to think her proposal cruel, and prefaced it by a few words on the state of the case. The little bit of romance touched the kind heart. Mrs. Rainsforth was shocked to think of the grief the governess must have suffered in secret while aiding to bear her burdens, and was resolved on letting her have this respite, going eagerly to assure her that she could be well spared. Baby was better, and papa was better, and the children would be good. But Genevieve knew too well how necessary she was, and had been telling Mr. Kendall of poor little mother's anxieties with her many delicate children, and her husband's failing health. She could not leave them with a safe conscience, and she would not show how she longed after quiet, the country, and her aunt. She stood firm, and Albinia could not say that she was not right. Mrs. Rainsforth was distressed, though much relieved, and was only pacified by the engagement that Miss Durrant should, when it was practicable, spend a long holiday with her friends. "At home," said Mr. Kendall, and the responsive look of mournful gratitude from beneath the black dewy eyelashes dispelled all marvel at his son's enduring attachment. He was wonderfully patient when Mrs. Rainsforth could not be content without Mrs. Kendall's maternal and medical opinion of the baby, on the road to and from the nursery consulting her on all the Mediterranean climates, and telling her what each doctor had said of Mr. Rainsforth's lungs, in the course of which Miss Durrant and her romance were put as entirely out of the little lady's mind as if she had never existed. The next day the Kendalls set their faces homewards, leaving Morris till the surgeon's work should be done, and Fred, as the aunts fondly hoped, to be their nursling. But behold, Sunday and Monday Colonel Fred spent in bed, smiling incessantly. Tuesday and Wednesday on the sofa. Thursday in going about London. Friday he was off to Liverpool. Saturday he had sailed for Canada. Albinia was coming nearer to the home that was pulling her by the heartstrings. Hedminster was past, and she had heard the welcome words, "All well," from the servant who brought the carriage. But how much more there was to know than Sophy's detailed letters could convey. Sophy, whose sincerity, though one of the most trustworthy things in the world, was never quite to be relied on as to her own health or Morris's conduct. At the gate there was a little chestnut curled being in a short black frock, struggling to pull the heavy gate open with her plump arms, and standing for one moment with her back to it, screaming "Mamma! Papa!" then jumping up and clapping her hands in ecstasy and oblivion, that the swing of the gate might demolish her small person between it and the horse. But there was no time for fright. Sophy caught her and secured the gate together, and the first glimpse assured Albinia that the hard gloom was absent, and there was Morris leaning against the iron rail of the hall steps. But he hardly moved, and his face was so strangely white and set that Albinia caught him in her arms, crying, "Are you well, my boy? Sophy, is he well?" "Quite well," said Sophy. But the boy had wriggled himself loose, stood but for an instant to receive his father's kiss, and had hold of the sword. The long cavalry sabre was almost as tall as himself, and he stood with both arms clasped round it. But no sooner did he feel their eyes upon him than he turned about and ran upstairs. It was not gracious, but they excused it. They had their little Albinia comfortably and childishly happy, as yet without those troublesome Kendall feelings that always demonstrated themselves in some perverse manner. And Sophy stood among them, that brighter, better Sophy who had so long been obscured, happy to have them at home, talking and asking questions eagerly about the journey, and describing the kindness of the Dusitoys and the goodness of the children. "Have you heard from Lucy?" asked Mr. Kendall, as Albinia went in pursuit of her little boy. "Yes, poor Lucy." "Is there no letter from him?" "Not for you, papa." "What, did he write to his uncle?" "No, papa, he wrote to me and to Mr. Pettylove. Cannot he be stopped, papa? Can he do any harm? Mr. Dusitoy and Mr. Pettylove think he can." "You mean that he wishes to question the will?" "You may be quite secure, my dear, nothing can be more safe." "Oh, papa, I am so very glad. Not to be able to hinder him was so dreadful, when he wanted to pit Lucy and me against you. I could never have looked at you. I should always have felt that you had something to forgive me. "I could not well have confounded you with Algernon, my dear," said Mr. Kendall. "What did Pettylove mean? Do you know?" "Not exactly. Something about grandpapa's old settlement, which frightened the vicar, though Mrs. Dusitoy said that it was only that he fancied nobody could do anything right without his help. Mr. Dusitoy is more angry with Algernon than I thought he could be with anybody." "No one but Algernon would ever have thought of it," said Mr. Kendall. I am sorry he has molested you, my dear. Have you any objection to let me see his letter? I kept it for you, papa, and a copy of my answer. I thought, though I am not of age, perhaps my saying I could have nothing to do with it might do some good. Algernon magniloquently condoled with his sister in law on the injustice from which she and her sister had suffered, in consequence of the adverse influence which surrounded her brother, and generously informed her that she had a champion to defeat the machinations against their rights. He had little doubt of the futility of the document, and had written to the legal adviser of the late Mr. Meadows, to inquire whether the will of that gentleman did not bar any power on the part of his grandson to dispose of the property. She might rely on him not to rest until she should be put in possession of the estate, unless it should prove to have been her grandfather's intention, in case of the present melancholy occurrence, that the elder sister should be the sole inheritrix, and he congratulated her on having such a protector, since under the unfortunate circumstances the sisters would have had no one to uphold their cause against their natural guardian. Sophy's answer was, "Dear Algernon, I prefer my natural guardian to any other whatever. I shall, for my part, owe you no thanks for attempting to frustrate my dear brother's wishes, and to raise an unbecoming dissension. I desire that no use of my name may be made, and you may rest assured that I should find nothing so difficult to forgive as any such interference in my behalf. Yours truly, Sophia Kendall." "Certainly," said Mr. Kendall, "no family ill will is complete unless money matters be brought in to aggravate it." "Do you think I did right, and spoke strongly enough, papa?" "Quite strongly enough," said Mr. Kendall, suppressing a smile. "I hope you wrote kindly to Lucy at the same time." "One could not help that, papa. But I did say a great deal about the outrageous impropriety of raising the question, because I thought Algernon might be ashamed." "Riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt," said Mr. Kendall. "Your grandfather's acquisitions have brought us little but evil hitherto, and now I fear that our dear Gilbert's endeavour to break the net which bound us into that system of iniquity and oppression may cause alienation from poor Lucy. Sophy, you must allow no apparent coldness or neglect on her part to keep you from writing often and affectionately." Morris here came down with his mother, and as soon as there was a moment's pause, laid hold of the first book he met with, and began, "I do not see the justness of the analogy to which Onufrio refers, but there are many parts of that vision on which I should wish to hear the explanations of Philolaethes." All broke out in amazement. "Why, Morris, has Mrs. Deucetoy been making a scholar of you?" "Oh, Morris, was this your secret?" cried Sophy. He had hidden his face in his mother's lap, and when she raised it, struggled to keep it down, and she felt him sobbing and panting for breath. Mr. Kendall stroked his hair, and they tried to soothe him, but he started up abruptly. "I don't mean ever to be a plague again, so I did it. But there, when Ulick said it would be a comfort, you are all going to cry again, papa and all, and that's worse." And stamping his foot passionately, he would have rushed out of the room, but was held fast in his father's arms, and indeed tears were flowing fast from eyes that his brother's death had left dry. "My child, my dear child," said Mr. Kendall, "it is comfort. No one can rule you as by God's grace you can rule yourself, and your endeavours to do this are the greatest blessing I can ask." One more kiss from his mother, and she let him go. He did not know how to deal with emotion in himself and hated the sight of it in others, so that it was better to let him burst away from them, while with one voice they admired, rejoiced, and interrogated Sophy. "I know now," she said, the rosy glow mantling in her cheek. "It must have been Mr. O'More." "Ah, has he been with you?" said her father. "Only once," said Sophy, her color deepening; "but Morris has been in a great hurry every day to go to him, and I saw there was some secret. One day Susan asked me to prevent Master Morris from teaching baby such ugly words that she could not sleep, not bad words, but she thought they were Latin. So I watched, and I heard Morris singing out some of the legend of Hiawatha, and insisting on poor little Aki telling him what Mishenahma spelt. Poor little Ox stared, as well she might, and obediently made the utmost efforts to say after him, Miss Henama, King of Fishes, but he was terribly discomposed at getting nothing but Niffy Ninny, King of Fifes. I went to her rescue and asked what they were about, but Mars thundered down on me all the Delawares and Mohawks and the Choctaws and Comanches, and baby squeaked after him as well as she could till I fairly stopped my ears. I thought Ulick must be reading the legend to him. Now I see he must have been teaching him to read it." "Can it be possible?" said Mr. Kendall. "He could not read words of 5 letters without spelling." "He always could do much more when he pleased than when he did not please," said Albinia. "I believe the impulse to use his understanding was all that was wanting, and I am very glad the impulse came from such a motive." Mr. Kendall ordained that Morris's reward should be learning Latin from himself, a perilous trial, but it proved that Mr. Kendall was really a good teacher for a child of spirit and courage, and Morris had early come to the age when boys do better with man than with woman. He liked the honor and the awe of papa's tutorship, and learnt so well that his father never believed in his past dunceship. But over studies that he did not deem sufficiently masculine, he could be as troublesome as ever, his attention absent, and his restlessness most wearisome. To an ordinary eye he was little changed, but his mother felt that the great victory of the will had been gained, and that his self was endeavoring to get the better of the spirit of insubordination and mischief. Night after night she found him sleeping with the balaclava sword by his side, and his hand clasped over it, and he always crept out of the way of Crimean news, though that he gathered up the facts was plain when he committed his sovereign to Ulick, with a request that it might be devoted to the comforts preparing to be sent to the 25th Lancers. Ulick wished him to consult his mother, but this he repelled. He could not endure the sight of a tear in her eye, and she could not restrain them when that chord was touched. It was a propensity she much disliked, the more because she thought it looked like affectation beside Sophy, whose feelings never took that course. But the more ill-timed the tears, the more they would come, at the most commonplace condolence or remote allusion. It was the effect of the long strain on her powers, and the severe shock coming suddenly after so much pressure and fatigue. Moreover, her habits had been so long disorganized that her time seemed blank, and she could not rouse herself from a feeling of languor and depression. Then Gilbert had been always on her mind, whether at home or absent, and it did not seem at first as if she had enough to fill up time or thoughts. She absolutely found herself doing nothing, because there was nothing she cared to do. Mr. Kendall's first object was the fulfillment of Gilbert's wishes, but Albinia soon felt how much easier it is for women and boys to make schemes than for men to bring them to effect, and how rash it is hastily to condemn those who tolerate abuses. The whole was carefully looked over with a surveyor, and it was only then understood how complicated were the tenures, and how varied the covenants of the numerous small tenements which old Mr. Meadows had amassed. It was not possible to be free of the legal difficulties under at least a year, and plans of drainage might be impeded for want of other people's consent. Even if all had been smooth, the sacrifice of income by destroying Tibbs Alley and reducing the number of cottages would be considerable. Meantime, the inspection had brought to light worse iniquities and greater wretchedness than Mr. Kendall had imagined, and his eagerness to set work was tenfold. His table was heaped with sanitary reports, and his fits of abstraction were over the components of bad air or builders' estimates. It only depended on Ulick to have resumed his intimacy at Willow Lawn, but the habit once broken was not resumed. He was often there, but never without invitation, and he was not always to be had. He had less leisure. He was senior clerk, and the junior was dull and untrained, and he often had work to do far into the evening. He looked bright and well, as though possessed of a sense of being valuable in his own place, more conducive to happiness than even congeniality of employment, and Sophy, though now and then disappointed at his non-appearance, always had a good reason for it, and continued to justify Mr. Deucetoy's boast that the heir of the hill had made another woman of her. Visiting cards had, of course, come in numbers to Willow Lawn, but Albinia seemed to have caught her husband's aversions, and it would be dangerous to say how long it was before she lashed herself into setting off for a round of calls. Nothing surprised her more than Miss Goldsmith's reception. Conscious of her neglect, she expected the stiff manner to be more formal than ever, but the welcome was almost warm, and there was something caressing in her fears that Mrs. Kendall would be tired. Mr. Goldsmith was not quite well. There were threatenings of gout, and his sister had persuaded him to visit the relations at Bristol next week. Everything might safely be trusted to young Moore, and therewith came such praise of his steadiness and ability that Albinia did not know which way to look when all was ascribed to Mr. Kendall's great kindness to him. It was too palpable to be altogether pleasant. Sophia Kendall was heiress enough to be a very desirable connection for the bank. Albinia was afraid she should see through the lady's graciousness, and took her leave in haste. But Sophy only said, "Do you remember, mamma, when the Goldsmiths thought we unsettled him?" Before Albinia had disarmed her reply of the irony on the tip of her tongue, the omnibus came lumbering round the corner, and a voice proceeded from the rear, and the door flew open, and there was a rapid exit. Face and voice, light step, and gay bearing, all were Fred, the empty sleeve, the sole remembrance to the shattered convalescent of a few weeks back. "There, Albinia, I said you should see her first. You haven't got any change, have you?" The last being addressed either to Albinia, the omnibus conductor, or a lady who made a tender of 2 shillings, while Albinia ordered the luggage on to Willow Lawn, though something was faintly said about the inn. "And there," cried Fred, with an emphatic twist of his moustache, "isn't she all I ever told you?" "The last thing was a brick," said Albinia, laughing, as she looked at the smiling, confiding, animated face, not the less pleasant for a French Canadian grace that recalled Genevieve. "The right article for building a hut, I hope," she said merrily. "But how and when could you have come?" "This morning, from Liverpool. We did not mean to storm you in this manner. We meant to have settled ourselves at the inn, and walked down. Emily was very particular about it. But you see, when he saw you, he forgot all my lectures," said Emily, taking his welcome for granted. "Very proper of him. But, Fred, I don't quite believe it yet. How long is it since we parted?" "6 weeks, just enough to go to Canada and back, with a fortnight in the middle to spare." "And pray, how long has Mrs. Fred existed?" "3 weeks and 2 days, and turning half round to give her the benefit of his words, it was on purely philanthropic principles, because I could not tie my own necktie. Now could I," said Emily pleadingly to Sophy, "now could I let him go back again alone, when he came so helpless and looking so dreadfully ill?" "And what are you going to do?" asked Albinia. "You can't join again." "Join? Why not? Here's a hand for a horse, and an arm for a wife, and the rest will be done much better for me than ever it was done before." "But with her, and at Sebastopol?" "That's the very thing," cried the Colonel, again turning about. "Nothing will serve her but to show how a backwoodsman's daughter can live in a hut." "And what will the General say?" "The General," cried Emily, "will endure me better as a fact than as a prospect, and we will teach him that a lady is not all made of nerves and of fancies. See what he will say if we let him into our paradise." Fred brightened, though Albinia's inquiry had for a moment taken him a little aback. The one being whom he dreaded was General Ferrars, for whom he cared 1,000 times more than for his own elder brother, and he was soon speculating, with his usual insouciance, as to how his announcement might have been received by his lordship, and whether the aunts would look at them as they went through London. Mr. Kendall met them at the gate, amazed at the avalanche of luggage, but well pleased, for he had grown very fond of Fred, and had been very anxious about him, thinking him broken and enfeebled for life, and hardly expecting him to return from his mad expedition. He was slow to believe his eyes and ears when he beheld a hale, handsome, vigorous man, full of life and activity, but his welcome and congratulations were of the warmest. He could far better stand a sudden inroad than if he had had to meditate for a week on entertaining the bride. Not that the bride wanted entertainment, except waiting upon her husband, who let himself be many degrees less handy than at Malta, for the pleasure of her attentions. Perhaps the person least gratified was Morris, for the child shrank with shy reverence from him whom his brother had saved, and would as soon have thought of making a plaything of Gilbert's sword as of having fun with the survivor. The sight of such a merry man was a shock, and he abruptly repelled all attempts at playing with him, and kept apart with a big book on a chair before him, a Kendallism for which he amply compensated when familiarity had diminished his awe. Mr. Kendall, though little disposed to exert himself to talk, liked to watch his wife reviving into animation, and Sophy taking a full share in the glee with which Emily enjoyed turning the laugh against the good-natured soldier. In the midst of their flush of joy there was a tender consideration about the young couple, such as to hinder their tone from jarring. Indeed, it was less consideration than fellow feeling, for Gilbert Kendall had become enshrined in the depths of Fred's heart, while to Emily the visit was well nigh a pilgrimage, All her hero worship was directed to the youth who had guarded her soldier's life, nursed him in his sickness, and, as he averred, inspired him with serious thoughts. Poor, failing, timid, penitent Gilbert was to her a very St. George, and every relic of him was viewed with reverence. She composed a countenance for him from his father's fine features, and fitted the fragments of his history into an ideal, till Sophy, after being surprised and gratified, began to view Gilbert through a like halo, and to rank him with his twin brother. Friendship was a new and agreeable phase of life to Sophy, who found a suitable companion in such an open-hearted person, simpler in nature and fresher than herself, free from English commonplaces, though older and of more standing. She expanded and brightened wonderfully, and Emily, imagining her a female Gilbert, was devoted to her, and thought her a marvel of learning, depth, goodness, and humility, the more striking for her tinge of grave pensiveness. "Why, Albinia," said the colonel, "didn't I hear that it was your handsome daughter who is married?" "Yes, poor Lucy was always called our pretty one." "More admired than her sister? Why, she never could have had a countenance." "Yes," said Albinia, highly gratified by the opinion of such a connoisseur. "I always told Winifred that Sophy was the beauty, but she has only lately had health or animation to set her off. I declare, when we overtook you in the street, she looked a perfect Spanish princess in her black robes and great shady hat. You ought always to keep her in black. Ha, Emily, what are you smiling at?" His wife looked up into his face with mischievous shyness in her eyes, as if she wanted him to say what would be a liberty in her. Somebody else had overtaken the ladies nearly at the same moment, and Albinia exulted in perceiving that the embellishment had been observed by others besides herself. She did not look so severe, but that Fred was encouraged to repeat, "Only lately had health or animation? When Irish winds blow this way, I fancy. But what will the aunts say?" "They are not Sophy's aunts, whatever they are to you." "What will Kendall say, which is more to the purpose?" "Oh, he saw it first. He will be delighted. But you must not say a word to him, for it can't come to anything just now." Albinia was thus confirmed in her anticipations, and the bridal pair, only wishing everybody to be as happy as themselves, took the matter up with such vivid interest and amusement, that she was rather afraid of a manifestation, such as to shock either her husband or the parties themselves. But Fred was too much of a gentleman, and Emily too considerate, for anything perilously marked. Only she thought Emily need not have been so decided in making room for Ulick next to Sophy, when they were all looking out at the young moon at the conservatory door that evening. And then Emily took her husband's arm, and insisted on going down the garden to be introduced to English nightingales, and though she was told they never had come there in the memory of man, she was bent on doing as she would be done by, and drew him along the silvered paths among the black shadows of the trees, and Ulick asked Sophy if she wished to go too. She looked as if she should like it very much. He fetched a couple of cloaks out of the hall, put her into one, and ran after Mrs. Ferrars with the other. Well, thought Albinia, as she stood at the conservatory door, how much more boldness and tact some people have than others. If I had lived 100 years, I should not have managed it so well. "What's become of them?" said Mr. Kendall, as she went back to the drawing room. "Gone to listen for nightingales." "Nightingales! How could you let them go into the river fog?" "Emily was bent upon it. She is too much of a bride not to have her way." "Umph! I wonder Sophy was so foolish." They came back in a quarter of an hour. No nightingales, and Fred was indulging in reminiscences of bullfrogs. The two ladies were rapturous on the effect of the moonbeams in the ripple of the waters, and the soft furry white mist rising over the meadows. Ulick shivered and leant over the fire to breathe a drier air, bantering the ladies for their admiration, and declaring that Mrs. Ferrars had taken the moan of an imprisoned house dog for the nightingale, which he disdainfully imitated with buzz, zizz, and google, assuring her she had had no loss. But he looked rather white and chilled. Sophy whispered something to her papa, who rang the bell and ordered in wine and hot water. "There, Emily," said Albinia, when he had taken his leave, "what shall we say to your nightingales if Mr. O'More catches his ague again?" "Oh, there are moments when people don't catch agues," said Fred. "He would be a poor fellow to catch an ague after all that, though, by the by, it is not a place to go at a night without a cigar." Albinia was on thorns, lest Sophy should be offended; but though her cheeks lighted up, and she was certainly aware of some part of their meaning, either she did not believe in the possibility of any one bantering her, or else the assumption was more agreeable than the presumption was disagreeable. She endured with droll puzzled dignity when Fred teased her anxiety the next day to know whether Mr. O'More had felt any ill effects, and it really appeared as if she liked him better for what might have been expected to be a dire affront. But then he was a man whose manner enabled to do and say whatever he pleased. Emily never durst enter on the subject with her, but had more than one confidential little gossip with Albinia, and repeatedly declared that she hoped to be in England when it took place. Indeed, that week's visit made them all so intimate that it was not easy to believe how recent was the acquaintance. The aunts had been so much disappointed at Fred's desertion, so much discomfited at his recovery contrary to all predictions, and so much annoyed at his marriage, that it took all their kindness and his Crimean fame to make them invite him and his colonial wife to the family office, to be present at the royal distribution of medals. However, the good ladies did their duty, and Emily and Sophy parted with promises of letters. The beginning of the correspondence was as full a description of the presentation of the medals as could be given by a person who only saw one figure wherever she went, and to whom the great incident of the day was that the gracious and kind-hearted Queen had herself fastened the left-handed colonel's medal, as well as Emily could have done it herself. There was another medal with two clasps that came to Bayford, and which was looked at in pensive but not unhappy silence. "You shall have it some day, Morris, but not now," said Mr. Kendall, and all felt that now meant his own lifetime. It was placed where Gilbert would well have liked to see it, beside his brother Edmund's watch. Emily made Mrs. Ainslie and Miss Ferrars more fond of her in 3 days than 11 years had made them of Winifred. Too fond, indeed, for they fell to preaching to Fred upon the horrors of Sebastopol, till they persuaded him that he was a selfish wretch, and brought him to decree that she should stay with them during his absence. But, as Emily observed, that was not what she left home for. She demolished his arguments with a small amount of playing at petulance, and triumphantly departed for the East, leaving Aunt Mary crying over her as a predestined victim. The last thing Fred did before sailing was to send Albinia a letter from his brother, that she might see how very kind and cordial Belraven was, besides something that concerned her more nearly. Lord Belraven was civil when it cost him nothing, and had lately regarded his inconvenient younger brother with favour, as bringing him distinction, and having gained 2 steps without purchase, removed 2 by his present rank, and the pension for his wound from being likely to become chargeable to him. So he had written such brotherly congratulations that good honest Fred was quite affected. He was even discursive enough to mention some connections of the young man who had been with Fred in the Crimea, a Mr. Cavendish Dusitoy, a very good sort of fellow, who gave excellent dinners and was a pleasant yachting companion. His wife was said to be very pretty and pleasing, but she had arrived at Genoa very unwell, had been since confined, and was not yet able to see any one. It was said to be the effect of her distress for the death of her brother, and the estrangement from her family, who had behaved very ill about his property. Had not Albinia Ferrars married into that family? Albinia knew enough of her noble relative to be aware that good dinners and obsequiousness were the way to his esteem, and Algernon's was the sort of arrogance that would stoop to adore a coronet. All this was nothing, however, to the idea of Lucy, ill in that strange place, with no one to care for her but her hard master. Albinia sometimes thought of going to find her out at Genoa, but this was too utterly wild and impossible, and nothing could be done but to write letters of affectionate inquiry, enclosing them to Lord Belraven. Algernon's answer was solemn, and as brief as he could make anything. He was astonished that the event had escaped the notice of the circle at Bayford, since he believed it had appeared in all the principal European newspapers, and his time had been so fully occupied that he had imagined that intimation sufficient, since it was evident from the tone of the recent correspondence that the family of Bayford were inclined to drop future intercourse. He was obliged for the inquiries for Lucy, and was happy to say she was recovering favourably, though the late unfortunate events and the agitation caused by letters from home had affected her so seriously that they had been detained at Genoa for nearly 4 months, to his great inconvenience, instead of pushing on to Florence and Rome. It had been some compensation that he had become extremely intimate with that most agreeable and superior person, Lord Belraven, who had consented to become sponsor to his son. Lucy wrote to Albinia. Poor thing, the letter was the most childishly expressed and the least childishly felt she had ever written. Its whole aspect was weak and woebegone, yet there was less self-pity and more endeavour to make the best of it than before. She had the dearest little baby in the world, but he was very delicate, and she wished mamma would send out an English nurse, for she could not bear that Italian woman. Her black eyes looked so fierce, and she was sure it was not safe to have those immense pins in her hair. Expense was nothing, but she should never be happy till she had an Englishwoman about him, especially now that she was getting better, and Algernon would want her to come out again with him. Dear Algernon, he had lost the Easter at Rome for her sake, but perhaps it was a good thing, for he was often out in Lord Belraven's yacht, and she could be quiet with baby. She did wish baby to have had her dear brother's names, but Algernon would not consent. Next Tuesday he was to be christened, and then followed a string of mighty names, long enough for a Spanish princess, beginning with Belraven. Lucy Dusitoy's dreary condition, in the midst of all that wealth could give, was a contrast to Emily Ferrars' buoyant delight in the borough which was her first married home, and proved a paradise to many a stray officer, ay, maybe to Lieutenant General Sir William Ferrars himself. Her letters were charming, especially a detail of Fred meeting Brian O'More coming out of the trenches, grim, hungry, and tired, having recently kicked a newly alighted shell down from the parapet, with the cool words, "Be off with you, you ugly baste you," of his wolfish appetite after having been long reduced to simple rations, though he kept a curly black lamb loose about his hut, because he hadn't the heart to kill it, and it served him for bed, if not for board, all his rugs and blankets having flown off in the hurricane, or been given to the wounded. He had been quite affronted at the suggestion that a Galway pig was as well lodged as himself. It was an insult to any respectable Irish animal. Albinia sent Mars to summon Ulick to enjoy the letter in store for him. He looked grave and embarrassed, and did not light up, as usual, at Brian's praises. He said that his aunt, who had written to him on business, had given a bad account of Mr. Goldsmith, but Albinia hardly thought this accounted for his preoccupation, and was considering how to probe it when her brother Mars opened the door. Ulick O'More, that's right, the very man I was in search of. How's Winifred, Morris? Getting on wonderfully well. I really think she is going to make a start, after all, and she is in such spirits herself. And the boy? Oh, a thumping great fellow. I promise you he'll be a match for your Morris. I do believe it is to reward Winifred for sparing you in the spring, when we wanted you so much. Come, sit down and wait for Edmund. No, I've not a moment to stay. I'm to meet Bury again at Woodside at 6 o'clock. He drove me there, and I walked on, looking in at your lodgings by the way, Ulick. I'm not there now. I am keeping guard at the bank. So they told me. Well, I hope your guard is not too strict for you to come over to Fairmead on Sunday. We want you to do our boy the kindness to be his godfather. Sophy blushed with approving gratitude. I don't consider that it will be a sinecure. He squalls in such a characteristic manner that I am convinced he will rival his cousin here in all amiable and amenable qualities. So I consider it particularly desirable that he should be well provided with great disciplinarians. You certainly could not find any one more accomplished in teaching dunces to read, said Albinia. When their mammas have taught them already, added Ulick, laughing. Thank you, but you know I can't sleep out. Hyder Ali and I are responsible for a big chest of sovereigns and all the rest of it. Nor could I lodge you at present. So we are agreed. My proposition is that you should drive my sister over on Sunday morning. My wife is wearying for a sight of her, and she has not been at Fairmead on a Sunday since she left it. Eh, Albinia? I suppose for such a purpose it is not wrong to use the horse, she said, her eyes sparkling. And you might put my friend Morris between you, if you can't go out pleasuring without him. I scorn you, sir. Morris is as good as gold. I shall leave him at home, I think, to prove that I can. That's the reward of merit, exclaimed Sophy. She expects my children to corrupt him, quoth Mr. Ferrars. For shame, Morris, that's on purpose to make me bring him. Well, we'll see what papa says, and if he thinks the new black horse strong enough or to be trusted with Mr. O'More. I only wish 'twas a jaunting car, cried Ulick. And what's the boy's name to be? Not Belraven, I conclude, like my unfortunate grandson. Morris, I hope. No, the precedent of his namesake would be too dangerous. I believe he is to be Edmund Ulick. Don't take it as too personal, Ulick, for it was the name of our mutual connection. I take the personal part, though, Morris. And thank you, said Albinia, and Mr. Ferrars looked more happy and joyous than at any time since his wife's health had begun to fail. Always cheerful, and almost always taking matters up in the most lively point of view, it was only by comparison that want of spirits in him could be detected, and it was chiefly by the vanishing of a certain careworn anxious expression about his eyes, and by the ring of his merry laugh, that Albinia knew that he thought better of his wife's state than for the last 5 or 6 years. Albinia and Ulig drove off at 6 o'clock on a lovely summer Sunday morning, with Morris between them in a royal state of felicity. That long fresh drive past summer hayfields sleeping in their silver bath of dew, and villages tardily awakening to the well earned Sunday rest, was not the least pleasant part of the day, and yet it was completely happy, not even clouded by one outbreak of Master Morris. Luckily for him, Mary had a small class, who absorbed her superabundant love of rule, and little Albie was a fair-haired, apple-cheeked maiden of 5, who awoke both admiration and chivalry, and managed to coquet with him and Ulick both at once, so that Willie had no disrespect to his sisters to resent. He was exemplary at church, well behaved at dinner, and so little on his mamma's mind that she had a delightful renewal of her acquaintance with the Sunday school, and a leisurable gossip with Mrs. Reed and the two Miss Reeds collectively and individually. But the best of all was a long quiet tete-a-tete with Winifred. After the evening service, Mr. Ferrars himself carried his newly christened boy back to the mother, and paused that his sister might come with him, and they might feel like the old times when the three had been alone together. Yes, said Winifred, when he had left them, it is very pretty playing at it, but one cannot be the same. Nor would one exactly wish it, said Albinia, though I think you are going to be more the same. Perhaps, said Winifred, the worst of being ill is that it does wear one's husband so. When he came in and tried to make me fancy we were gone back to Willie's time, I could not help thinking how different you both looked. Well, so much the better and more respectable, said Albinia. You know I always wanted to grow old. I don't want to stop short like your sister Anne, who looks as much the child of the house as ever. I wish you had as few cares as Anne. Look, I declare that's a gray hair. I know, I like it. Now Sophy is growing young, and I'm growing old. It is all correct. Old indeed, ejaculated Winifred, looking at her fair fresh complexion and bright features. Don't try for that, when even Edmund is not grey. Yes, he is, said Albinia gravely. Malta sewed many white threads in his black head, and worry about those buildings has brought more. Worry, I'm very sorry to hear of it. Yes, the tenures are so troublesome, and everybody is so cantankerous. If he wanted to set up some pernicious manufacture, it could not be worse. The Osbornes, after having lived with Tibbs Alley close to them all their lives, object to the almshouses. Mr. Barron won't have the new drains carried through his little strip of land. The town council think we are going to poison the water, and Pettylove, and everybody else who owns a wretched tenement, that we shall increase the wants of their tenants, and lower their rents. If it be carried through, it will be by that sheer force in going his own way that Edmund can exert when he chooses. And he will? Oh yes, no fear of that. He goes on, avoiding seeing or hearing what he has not to act upon. But worse than all are the people themselves. Tibbs Alley all has notice to quit, but none of them can be got rid of till Martinmas, and some not till Lady Day. And the beer house people are in such a rage. The turnout of the public houses come and roar at our gate on Saturday nights, and they write up things on the wall against him. And one day they threw over into the garden what little Aki called a poor dear dead pussy. I believe they tell them all sorts of absurd things about his tyranny. Poor creatures! Can't you get it stopped? Edmund won't summon any one because he thinks it would do more harm than good. He says it will pass off, but it grieves him more than he shows. He thinks he could once have made himself more popular, but I don't know, it is a horrid set. I thought you said he was in good spirits. And so he is. He never gets depressed and unwilling to be spoken to. He is ready to take interest in everything and always so busy. When I remember how he never seemed to be obliged to attend to anything, I laugh at the contrast. And yet he goes about it all so gravely and slowly that it never seems like a change. In this and other home talk, nearly an hour had passed when Mr. Ferrars returned. "Are you come to tell me to go?" said Albinia. "Not particularly," he said, in a tone that made her laugh. "No, no," said Winifred. "I want a great deal more of her. Where have you been?" "I have been to see old Wilkes. Ulick walked down with me. By the by, Albinia, what nonsense has Fred's wife been talking to his brother?" "Emily does not talk nonsense," fired up Albinia, coloring nevertheless. "The worse for her then. However, it seems Brian has disturbed this poor fellow very much by congratulating him on his prospects at Willow Lawn." "Oh, that is what made him so distant and cautious, is it?" laughed Albinia. "I think Miss Emily might as well not have betrayed it." "Betrayed? What could have passed?" "Oh, Emily and Fred saw it as plain as I did. Why, it does not do credit to your discernment, Morris. Papa found it out long ago and told me." "Kendall did?" "Yes, that he did, and did not mind the notion at all, rather liked it, in fact." "Well," said Mr. Ferrars, in a different tone, "it is a very queer business. I certainly did not think the lad showed any symptoms. He said he had heard gossip about it before, and had tried to be careful. His aunt talked to him once, but, as he said, it would be nothing but the rankest treason to think of such a thing, on the terms on which he is treated." "Ay, that's it," said Albinia. "He acts most perfectly." "Perfectly, indeed, if that were acting," said Mr. Ferrars. "And what made him speak to you?" asked Winifred. "He wanted to consult me. He said it was very hard on him, for all the pleasure he had came from his intercourse with Willow Lawn, and he could not bear to keep at a distance, because it looked as if he had not forgotten the old folly about the caricature. But he was afraid of the report coming to your ears or Mr. Kendall's, because you would think it so wrong and shameful an abuse of your kindness." "And that's his whole concern?" "So he told me." "And what advice did you give him?" "I told him Bayford was bent on gossip, and no one heeded it less than my respected brother and sister." "That was famous of you, Morris. I was afraid you would have put it upon his honour and the state of his own heart." "Sooth to say, I did not think his heart appeared very ticklish." "Oh, Morris, Morris! But you've not been there to see the hot fits and the cold fits. It is a very fine thermometer whether he says Sophy or Miss Kendall." "And you say Edmund perceived this?" "Much you would trust my unassisted cuteness. I tell you he did, and that it will make him happier than anything." "Very well, then my advice will have done no harm. I did not think there had been so much self-control in an Irishman. Had he not better say, so much blindness in the rector of Fairmead? Laughed Albinia. And pray, what course is the affair to take? The present, I suppose. Some catastrophe will occur at last to prove to him that we honor him and don't view it as outrageous presumption. And then, oh, there can be no doubt that he will have a share in the bank, and Sophy may buy toleration for his round O. After all, he has the best of it as to ancestry, and we Kendalls need not turn up our noses at banking. I think he will be too proud to address her except on equality as to money matters. Pride is sometimes quelled and love free, said Albinia. No, no, content yourself with having given the best advice in the world, with your eyes fast shut. And Albinia went home in high spirits. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of The Young Stepmother by Charlotte Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Not long afterwards, Ulick O'More was summoned to Bristol, where his uncle had become suddenly worse. But he had only reached Headminster when a telegraph met him with the news of Mr. Goldsmith's death and orders to remain at his post. He came to the Kendalls in the evening in great grief. He had really come to love and esteem his uncle, and he was very unhappy at having lost the chance of a reconciliation for his mother. As her chief friend and confidant, he knew that she regarded the alienation of her own family as the punishment of her disobedient marriage, and that his own appointment had been valued chiefly as an opening towards fraternal feeling, and reproached himself for not having made more direct efforts to induce his uncle to enter into personal intercourse with her. If I had only ventured it before he went to Bristol, he said, I was a fool not to have done so, and there the Goldsmiths detest the very name of us. Why could they not have telegraphed for me? I might have heard what would have done my mother's heart good for the rest of her life. I am sure my poor uncle wanted to ease his mind. May he not have sent some communication direct to her? I trust he did. I have long thought he only kept her aloof from habit, and felt kindly towards her all the time, and never could persuade himself to make a move towards her until too late, said Albinia. Yes, nothing comes home to one more than words. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whiles thou art in the way with him. If once one comes to think there's creditable pride in holding out, there's no end to it, or else too much end. Mr. Goldsmith was persevering in the example his father had set him, said Mr. Kendall. Ay, my mother never blamed either, and I'm afraid, if the truth were told, my father was hot enough too, though it would all have been bygones with him long ago, if they would have let it. But I was thinking just then of my own foolishness last winter, when I would not grant you it was pride, Mrs. Kendall, for fear I should have to repent of it. What has brought you to see that it was? Asked she. One comes to a better mind when the fit is off, he said. I hope I will not be as bad next time. I hope we shall never give you a next time, said Albinia, for neither party is comfortable, perched on a high horse. And you see, continued Ulick, it is hard for us to give up our pride, because it is the only thing we've got of our own, and has been meat, drink, and clothing to us for many a year. No wonder you make the most of it. True, I think a very high-born and very rich man might be humble, said Ulick, so meditatively that they laughed. But Sophy said, no, that is not a paradox. The real difficulty is not in willingly yielding, but in taking what we cannot help. Well, said Ulick, I hope it is not pride not to intend working under Andrew Goldsmith. Do you consider that as your fate? Asked Albinia. Never my fate, said Ulick quickly, hardly even my alternative, for he would like to put up a notice, no Irish need apply. We had enough of each other last winter. And do you suppose, said Mr. Kendall, that Mr. Goldsmith has left your position exactly the same? I've no reason to think otherwise. I refused all connection with the bank if it was to interfere with my name. I don't think it unlikely that he may have left me a small compliment in the way of shares, but if so, I shall sell them and make them keep me at Oxford. I'm not too old yet. Then the work of these 4 years is wasted, said Mr. Kendall gravely. No, indeed, cried Ulick, not if it takes me where I've always longed to be, or if not, I flatter myself I'm accountant enough to be an agent in my own country. Anything to get away from here, said Albinia, with a shade of asperity provoked by the spirit of enterprise in his voice. After all, it is a bit of a place, said Ulick, and the office parlor is not just a paradise. Then 'tis all on such a narrow scale, too little to absorb one, and too much to let one do anything else. I see how larger transactions might be engrossing, but this is mere cramping and worrying. I know I could do better for my family in the end than by what I can screw out of my salary now. And if it is no longer to give my poor mother a sense of expiation, as she calls it, why, then the cage door is open. His eyes glittered, and Sophy exclaimed, yes, and now the training is over, it has made you fitter to fly. It has, he said, and I'm thankful for it. Without being here, I would never have learnt application, nor some better things, I hope. They scarcely saw him again till after the funeral, when late in the day he came into the drawing-room, and saying that his aunt was pretty well and composed, he knelt down on the floor with the little auk, and silently built up a tower with her wooden bricks. His hand trembled nervously at first, but gradually steadied as the elevation became critical, and a smile of interest lighted his face as he became absorbed in raising the structure to the last brick, holding back the eager child with one hand, lest she should overthrow it. Completion, triumph, a shock, a downfall. Well, cried the elder Albinia, unable to submit to the suspense. Tell us, Lovey, answered Ulick, smiling sadly as he passed his hand over his brow. It's too bad of him, broke out Mrs. Kendall. I thought you were prepared, said Sophy, severely, disappointed to see him so much discomposed. How should I be prepared, said he, petulantly, for the whole concern, house and bank, and all the rest of it? Left to you, was the cry. Every bit of it, and an annuity apiece charged on it to my mother and aunt for their lives. My aunt told me how it came about. It was all that fellow Andrew's fault. Or misfortune, murmured Albinia. My poor uncle had made a will in Andrew's favour long before my time, and at Bristol he wanted to make some arrangement for my mother and for me, but it seems Mr. Andrew took exception at me, would not promise to continue me on, nor to give me a share in the business, and at last my uncle was so much disgusted that he sent for a lawyer and cut Andrew out of his will altogether. My aunt says he went on asking for me, and it was Andrew's fault, that they wrote instead of telegraphing. You can't think what kind messages he sent to me, and Ulic's eyes filled with tears. My poor uncle away from home and with that selfish fellow. Did he send any message to your mother? Yes, he told my aunt to write to her that he was sorry they had been strangers so long, and that I'd been like a son to him. I'm sure I wish I had been. I dare say he would have let me if I had not flown out about my I could have saved changing it without making such an intolerable row, and then he might have died more at peace with the world. At peace with you, at least, he did. I trust so, but I could only have been by his side and felt myself a comfort and thanked him with all my heart. Maybe he would have listened to me and not have sown ill will between Andrew and me by giving neither what we would like. Do you expect us to be sorry? No, I came to be helped out of my ingratitude and discontent at finding the cage door shut and myself chained to the oar, for as things are left, I could not get it off my hands without giving up my mother's interests and my aunt's. Besides, my poor uncle left me an entreaty to keep things up creditably like himself and do justice by the bank. It is as if, poor man, it was an idol that he had been high priest to, and wanted me to be the same. Ay, and sacrifice too. Nay, there are two ways of working, two kinds of sacrifice, and besides, you are still working for your mother. So I am, but without the hope she had before. To be sure, it would be affluence at home, or would be if she could have it in her own hands. Little Redmond shall have the best of educations, and we must mind there is something in advance by the time Brian wants to purchase his company. Albinia asked how his aunt liked the arrangement. It seemed that Andrew had offended her nearly as much as her brother, and that she was clinging to Ulick as her great comfort and support. He did not like to stay long away from her, but he had rushed down to Willow Lawn to avoid the jealous congratulations of the cousinhood. "You will hardly keep from glad people," said Albinia. "You must shut yourself up if you cannot be congratulated. How rejoiced Mr. Deucetoy will be!" "Whatever is best," sighed Ulick. "I shall mind less when the first is past. I must go and entertain all these people at dinner." And he groaned, "Good evening. Hi ho! I wonder if our banshee will think me worth keening for." "I hope she will have no occasion yet," said Albinia, as he shut the door. "But she will be a very foolish banshee if she does not, for she will hardly find such another O'More. Well, Sophy, my dear?" "We should have missed him," said Sophy, as grave as a judge. Albinia's heart beat high with the hope that Ulick would soon perceive sufficient consolation for remaining at Bayford. But of course he could make no demonstration while Miss Smith continued with him. She made herself very dependent on him, and he devoted his evenings to her solace. He had few leisure moments, for the settlement of his affairs occupied him, and full attention was most important to establish confidence at this critical juncture, when it might be feared that his youth, his nation, and Andrew Goldsmith's murmurs might tell against him. Mr. Kendall set the example of putting all his summer rents into his hands, and used his influence to inspire trust. And fortunately the world had become so much accustomed to transacting affairs with him, that the country business seemed by no means inclined to fall away. Still there was much hard work and some perplexity. The Bristol connection made themselves troublesome, and the ordinary business was the heavier from the clerks being both so young and inexperienced, that he was obliged to exercise close supervision. It was guessed, too, that he was not happy about the effect of the influx of wealth at home, and that he feared it would only add to the number of horses and debts. He soon looked terribly fagged and harassed, and owned that he envied Mr. Hope, who had just received the promise of a district church, in course of building under Colonel Bury's auspices, about 4 miles from Fairmead. To work his way through the university and take holy orders had been Ulig's ambition. He would gladly have endured privation for such an object, and it did seem hard that such aspirations should be so absolutely frustrated, and himself forced into the stream of uncongenial, unintellectual toil, in so obscure and uninviting a sphere. The resignation of all lingered hope of escape, and the effort to be contented, cost him more than even his original breaking in, and Mr. Kendall one day found him sitting in his little office parlor, unable to think or speak, under a terrible visitation of his autumnal tormentor, Brow Agu. This made Mr. Kendall take to serious expostulation. It was impossible to go on in this way. Why did he not send for a brother to help him? Ulick could not restrain a smile at the fruitlessness of thinking of assistance of this kind from his elder brothers, and as to little Redmond, the only younger one still to be disposed of, he hoped to do better things for him. Then send for a sister. He hoped he might bring Rose over when his aunt was gone, but he could not shut those two up together at any price. Then, said Mr. Kendall, rather angrily, get an experienced, trustworthy clerk, so as to be able to go from home, or give yourself some relaxation. Yes, I inquired about such a person, but there's the salary, and where would be the chance of getting Redmond to school? I think your father might see to that. Ulick had no answer to make to this. The legacy to Mrs. O'More might nearly as well have been thrown into the sea. Well, said Mr. Kendall, walking about the room, why don't you keep a horse? As a less costly animal than brother, sister, or clerk, said Ulick, laughing. Your health will prove more costly than all the rest if you do not take care. Well, my aunt told me it would be respectable and promote confidence if I lived like a gentleman and kept my horse. I'll see about it, said Ulick, in a more persuadable tone. The seeing about it resulted in the arrival of a genuine product of County Galway, a long-legged, raw-boned hunter, with a wild, frightened eye, quivering, suspicious-looking ears, and an ill-omened name, compounded of kill and of kick, which Morris alone endeavored to pronounce. Also an outside car, very nearly as good as new. This last exceeded Ulick's commission, but it had been such a bargain that Connell had not been able to resist it. Indeed, it cost more in coming over than the original price, but Ulick nearly danced round it, promising Mrs. and Miss Kendall that when new cushioned and painted they would find it beat everything. He was not quite so envious of Mr. Hope when he devoted the early morning hours to kill ye kick ye, as the incorrect world called his steed, and if the truth must be told, he first began to realize the advantages of wealth when he set his name down among the subscribers to the hounds. Nor was this the only subscription to which he was glad to set his name. There were others where Mr. Dusitoy wanted funds, and Mr. Kendall's difficulties were lessened by having another lord of the soil on his side. Some exchanges brought land enough within their power to make drainage feasible, and Ulick started the idea that it would be better to locate the almshouses at the top of the hill, on the side of Madame Belmarch's old house, than to place them where Tibbs Alley at present was, close to the river and far from church. Mr. Kendall's plans were unpopular, and two or three untoward circumstances combined to lead to his being regarded as a tyrant. He could not do things gently, and had not a conciliating manner. Had he been more free spoken, real oppression would have been better endured than benefits against people's will. He interfered to prevent some Sunday trading, and some of the Tibbs Alley tenants who ought to have gone at midsummer chose to stay on and set him at defiance till they had to be forcibly ejected. Whereupon Ulig O'More showed that he was not thoroughly Anglicized by demanding if, under such circumstances, it was safe to keep the window shutters unclosed at night. Mr. Kendall's head was such a beautiful mark under the lamp. If not a mark for a pistol, he was one for the disaffected blackguard papers, which made up a pathetic case of a helpless widow with her bed taken away from under her, ending with certain vague denunciations which were read with roars of applause at the last beer shop, which could not be cleared till Christmas, while the closing of the rest sent herds thither, and papers were nightly read, representing the nabob expelling the industrious from the beloved cottages of their ancestors by turns to swell his own overgrown garden, or to found a convent, whence, as a disguised Jesuit, he meant to convert all Bayford to popery. As Albinia wrote to Genevieve, they were in a state of siege, for only in the middle of the day did Mr. Kendall allow the womankind to venture out without an escort. The evening was disturbed by howlings at the gate, and all sorts of petty acts of spite were committed in the garden, such as injuring trees, stealing fruit, and carrying off the children's rabbits. Let that be as it might, Genevieve owned herself glad to come to hospitable Willow Lawn, though sorry for the cause. Poor Mr. Rainsforth, after vainly striving to recruit his health at Torquay during the vacation, had been sentenced to give up his profession and ordered to Madeira, and Genevieve was upon the world again. The Kendalls claimed her promise of a long visit, or rather that she should come home and take time and choice in making any fresh engagement; nay, that she should not even inquire for a situation till after Christmas; and after staying to the last moment, when she could help the Rainsforths, she proposed to spend a day or two with her aunt at the convent, and then come to her friends at Bayford. Mr. Kendall drove his ladies to fetch her. He had lately indulged the household with a large comfortable open carriage with two horses, a rival to Mr. O'More's notable car, where he used to drive in an easy lounging fashion on one side, with Hyder Ali to balance him on the other. This was a grand shopping day, and endless business, and as the autumn day began to close in, even Mr. Kendall's model patience was nearly exhausted before they called for their little friend. There was something very sweet and appropriate in her appearance. Her dress, without presuming to share their mourning, did not insult it by gay coloring. It was a quiet dark violet and white checked silk, a black mantle, and black velvet bonnet, with a few green leaves to the lilac flowers, and the face, when at rest, was softly pensive, but ready to respond with cheerful smiles and grateful looks. She had become more English, and had dropped much foreign accent and idiom, but without losing her characteristic grace and power of disembarrassing those to whom she spoke, and in a few moments even Sophy had lost all sense of meeting under awkward or melancholy circumstances, and was talking eagerly to her dear old sympathizing friend. There was a great exchange of tidings. Genevieve had much to tell of her dear Rainsforths, the many vicissitudes of anxiety in which she had shared, and of the children's way of taking the parting, and of the dear little Fanny, who seemed to have carried away so large a piece of her susceptible heart, that Sophy could not help breaking out, "Well, I do think it is very hard to make yourself a bit of a mother's heart, only to have it torn out again." Albinia smiled and said, "After all, Sophy, happiness in this world is in such loving, only we don't find it out till the rent has been made." "And some people can get fond of anything," said Sophy. "I'm sure," said Genevieve, "every one is so kind to me, I can't help it." "I was not blaming you," said Sophy. "People are the better for it. But I cannot like except where I esteem, and that does not often come." "Oh, don't you think so?" cried Genevieve. "I don't mean moderate approval. That may extend far, and with it good will. But there is a deep concentrated feeling which I don't believe those who like every one can ever have, and that is life." Perhaps the deepening twilight favored the utterance of her feelings, for as they were descending a hill, she said, "Mamma, that was the place where Morris was brought back to me." She had before passed it in silence, but in the dark she was not afraid of betraying the expression that the thrill of exquisite recollection brought to her countenance, and leaning back in her corner, indulged in listening to the narration, as Albinia, unaware of the special point of the episode, related Morris's desperate enterprise, going on to dilate on the benefit of having Mr. O'More at the bank rather than Andrew Goldsmith. "Ah," said Genevieve, "it is he who wants to pull down our dear old house. I shall quarrel with him." Genevieve making common cause with the obstructives of Bayford, as if he had not enemies enough. "What's that light in the sky?" exclaimed Sophy, starting up to speak to her father on the driving seat. "A bonfire," said Mr. Kendall. "If we had remembered that it was the 5th of November, we would not have stayed out so late." The next moment he drew up the horses, exclaiming, "Mr. Hope, will you have a lift?" Mr. Hope, rather to the lady's surprise, took the vacant place beside Sophy, instead of climbing up to the box. He had been to see his intended parish, and was an enviable man, for he was as proud of it as if it had been an intended wife, and Albinia, who knew it for a slice of dreary heath, was entertained with his raptures. Church, schools, and parsonage, each in their way, were perfection, or at least promised to be, and he had never been so much elevated or so communicative. The speechless little curate seemed to have vanished. The road, as may be remembered, did not run parallel with the curve of the river, but cutting straight across, entered Bayford over the hill, passing a small open bit of waste land where stood a few cottages, the outskirts of the town. Suddenly coming from an overshadowed lane upon this common, a glare of light flashed on them, showing them each other's faces, and casting the shadow of the carriage into full relief. The horses shied violently, and they beheld an enormous bonfire raised on a little knoll about 20 yards in front of them, surrounded by a dense crowd, making every species of hideous noise. Mr. Kendall checked the horses' start, and Mr. Hope sprang to their heads. They were young and scarcely trustworthy. Their restless movement showed alarm, and it was impossible to turn them without both disturbing the crowd and giving them a fuller view of the object of their terror. Mr. Kendall came down, and reconnoitering for a moment, said, "You had better get out while we try to lead them round. We will go home by Squash Lane." Just then a brilliant glow of white flame, and a tremendous roar of applause, put the horses in such an agony that they would have been too much for Mr. Hope, had not Mr. Kendall started to his assistance, and a man standing by likewise caught the rein. He was a respectable carpenter who lived on the heath, and touching his hat as he recognized them, said, "Sir, if the ladies would come into my house, and you too, sir. The people are going on in an odd sort of way, and Mrs. Kendall would be frightened. I'll take care of the carriage." Mr. Kendall went to the side of the carriage and asked the ladies if they were alarmed. "Oh, no," answered Albinia, "it is great fun." And as the horses fidgeted again, "It feels like a review." "You had better get out," he said. "I must try to back the horses till I can turn them without running over any one. Will you go into the house? You did not expect to find Bayford so riotous," he added with a smile as he assisted Genevieve out. "You are not going to get up again," said Albinia, catching hold of him, and in her dread of his committing himself to the mercy of the horses, returning unmeaning thanks to the carpenter's urgent requests that she would take refuge in his house. In fact, the scene was new and entertaining, and on the farther side of the road, sheltered by the carriage, the party were entirely apart from the throng, which was too much absorbed to notice them, only a few heads turning at the rattling of the harness, and the ladies were amused at the bright flame, and the dark figures glancing in and out of the light, the shouts of delight, and the merry faces. "There's Guy Fawkes!" cried Albinia, as a procession of scarecrows were home on chairs amid thunders of acclamation. "But whom have they besides? Here are some new characters." "Most lugubrious looking," said Genevieve. "I cannot make out the shouts." "It is the nabob," said Mr. Kendall. "Perhaps you do not know that it is my alias. This is my execution." The carpenter implored them to come in, and Mr. Hope added his entreaties, but Mr. Kendall would not leave the horses, and the ladies would not leave him, and they all stood still while his effigy was paraded round the knoll, the mark of every squib, the object of every invective that the rabble could roar out at the top of their voices. Jesuits and Papists, Englishmen treated like blackamoor slaves in the Indies, honest folk driven out of house and home. Such was the burthen of the cries that assailed the grim representative carried aloft, while the real man stood unmoved as a statue, his tall, powerful figure unstirred, his long driving whip resting against his shoulder without betraying the slightest motion, neither firm lip nor steady eye changing. Genevieve, with tears in her eyes, exclaimed, "Oh, this is madness! Will no one tell them how wicked they are?" "Never mind, my dear," said Mr. Kendall, pressing the hand that in her fervour she had laid on his arm. "They will come to their senses in time. No, Mr. Hope, I beg you will not interfere. They are in no state for it. They have done no harm as yet." "I wonder what the police are about," cried Albinia indignantly. "They are too few to do any good," said Mr. Kendall. "It may be better that they are not incensing the mob. It will all go off quietly when this explosion has relieved their feelings." They felt as if there were something grand in this perfectly dispassionate reception of the outrage, and they stood awed and silenced, Sophy leaning on him. "It will soon be over now," he said. "They are poking up the name to receive me. Hark! What's that?" The mob came swaying back, with a rich voice swelled above all the din. "Boys, boys, is it burning your friends you are?" Then for the first time Mr. Kendall started and muttered, "Foolish lad, is he here?" Confused cries rose again, but the other voice gained the mastery. "So you call that undertaker looking figure there, Mr. Kendall?" Small credit to your taste. You want to burn him. What for? For being a nabob and a tyrant, was the shout. Much you know of nabobs. No, I'll tell you what it's for. It is because his son got his death fighting for his queen and his country a year ago, and on his deathbed bade him to do his best to drive the fever from your doors and shelter you and save you from the Union in your old age. Is that a thing to burn him for? We want no Irish papists here, shouted a blackguard voice. Serve him with the same sauce. I never was a papist, was the indignant reply. No more was he. But I've said that the place shan't disgrace itself, and I'm with you, shouted another above all the howls of the mob. Gilbert Kendall was as kind-hearted a chap as ever lived, and I'll see no wrong done to his father. Tremendous uproar ensued. Then the well-known tones pealed out again. I've given my word to save his likeness. Come on, boys. Hurrah for Kendall. The war cry was echoed by a body of voices. There was a furious melee and a charge towards the nabob, who rocked and toppled down, while stragglers came pressed backwards on all sides. Here, Hope, take care of them. Stay with them, said Mr. Kendall, putting the whip into the curate's hand and striding towards the nucleus of the fray through the throng who were driven backwards. O'More, he called, what's all this? Give over. Are you mad? And then catching up and setting on his legs a little boy, go home. Get out of all this mischief. What are you doing? Take home that child. To a gaping girl with a baby. O'More, I say, I'll commit every man of you if you don't give over. He was recognized, and those who had little appetite for the skirmish gave back from him. But the more reckless and daring small fry began shrieking, the nabob, and letting off crackers and squibs, through which he advanced upon the knot of positive combatants who were exchanging blows over his prostrate image in front of the fire. One he caught by the collar in the act of aiming a blow. The fist was instantly levelled at him with the cry, You rascal, what do you mean by it? But the fierce struggle failed to shake off the powerful grasp, and at the command, Don't be such a fool, Ulick burst out, Murder, 'tis himself, and in the surprise was dragged some paces before recovering his perceptions. The cry of police had at the same instant produced a universal scattering, and 5 policemen, coming on the ground, found scarcely any one to separate or capture. Mr. Kendall relaxed his hold, saying, You are my prisoner. I didn't think you'd been so strong, said Ulick, shaking himself and looking bewildered. Where's the effigy? What's that to you? Come away like a rational being. Ha! What's that? As a frightful agonizing shriek rent the air, and a pillar of flame came rushing across the now open space. It was a child, one mass of fire, and flying in its anguish from all who would have seized it. One moment of horror, and it had vanished. The next, Genevieve's voice was heard crying, Bring me something more to press on it. She had contrived to cross its path with her large carriage rug, and was kneeling over it, forcing down the rug to smother the flames. Mr. Hope brought her a shawl, and they all stood round in silent awe. The poor child will be stifled, said Albinia, kneeling down to help to unfold its face. The poor little face, distorted with terror and agony. One of the policemen recognized it as the child of the public house in Tibbs Alley. There were moans, but no one dared to uncover the limbs, and the policeman and Mr. Hope proposed carrying it at once to Mr. Bowles, and then home. Mr. Kendall desired that it should be laid on the seat of the carriage, which he would drive gently to the doctor's. Genevieve got in to watch over the poor little boy, and the others walked on by the side, past the battlefield, now entirely deserted, too much shocked for aught but conjectures on his injuries and the cause of the misfortune. Either he must have been pushed in on the fire by the runaway rabble, or have trod upon some of the scattered combustibles. Mr. Bowles desired that the child should be taken home at once, promising to follow instantly. So at the entrance of Tibbs Alley the carriage stopped, and Mr. Hope lifted out the poor little wailing bundle. Albinia was following, but a decided prohibition from her husband checked her. I would not have either of you go to that house on any account. Tell them to send to us for whatever they want, but that is enough. There was no gainsaying such a command, but as they reached the door of Willow Lawn, Mr. Kendall exclaimed, "Where is Miss Durrant?" "She is gone with the little boy," said Sophy. "She told me she hoped you would not be displeased. Mr. Hope will take care of her, and she will soon come in." "Every one is mad to night," cried Mr. Kendall. "In such a place as that! I will go for her directly." "Pray don't," said Albinia. "No one could speak a rude word to her on such an errand. She and Mr. Hope will be much more secure from uncivility without you." "I believe it may be so, but I wish—" His wish was broken off, for his little Albinia, screaming "Papa, papa," clung to him in a transport of caresses, which Morris explained by saying, "Little Aukie has been crying, mamma. She thought they were burning papa in the bonny." "Papa not burnt!" cried little Aukie, patting his cheeks, and laying her head on his shoulders alternately as he held her to his breast. "Naughty people wanted to make a fire, but they shan't burn papa or poor Guy Fawkes, or any of the good men." "And where were you, Ulick?" cried Morris, in an imperious injured way. "You said once, perhaps you would take me to see the fire, and I went up to the bank, and they said you were gone, and it was glaring so in the sky, and I did so want to go." "I am glad you stayed away, my man," said Albinia. "I did want to go," said Morris, "and I ran up to the top of the street, and there was Mr. Tritton, and he said if I liked a lark he would take care of me, but—" and there he stopped short, and the colour came into his face. Albinia threw her arm round him and kissed him, saying, "My trusty boy, and so you came home." "Yes, and there was Aukie crying about their burning papa, and she would not go up to the garret window to see the fire, nor do anything." "Why, what is the sword here for?" exclaimed Sophy, finding it on the stairs. "Because then Aukie was not so afraid." For once Morris had been exemplary, keeping from the tempting uproar, and devoting himself to soothing his little sister. It was worth all the vexations of the evening. But he went on to ask if Ulick could not take him now, if the fire was not out yet. "Not exactly," said Mr. Kendall dryly. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Kendall," said Ulick, who had apparently only just resumed the use of speech. "Don't know what I may have done when you collared me, but I'd no more notion of its being you than the Lord Lieutenant." "And pray what took you there?" asked Mr. Kendall. "The surprise was quite as great to me." "Why," said Ulick, "one of the little lads of my Sunday class gave me a hint the other day that those brutes meant to have a pretty go to night, and that Jackson was getting up a figure of the nabob to break their spite upon. So I told my little fellow to give a hint to a few more of the right sort, and we'd go up together, and not let the rascals have their own way. Upon my word, I wonder what the vicar will say to the use you make of his Sunday school. Pretty work for his model teacher. What better could the boys be taught than to fight for the good cause? Why, no one is a scratch the worse for it. And do you think we could sit by and see our best friend used worse than a dog? Why not give notice to the police? And would you have me hinder a fight? Cried Ulick, in the most Irish of all his voices. Oh, very well, if you like, only there will be a run on the bank to-morrow. What has Ulick been doing, Sophy? asked Morris. Only what you would have done had you been older, Morris, she said, in a hurt voice, defending papa's effigy, for which he does not seem to meet with much gratitude. Well, said Mr. Kendall, who all the time had had more gratitude in his eyes than on his tongue, if the burning had had the same consequence as melting one's waxen effigy was thought to have, it might have been worth while to interfere, but I should have thought it more dignified in a respectable, substantial householder to let those foolish fellows have their swing. More dignified, maybe, smiled Albinia, but less like an O'More. No, you are not going, said Mr. Kendall. I shall not release my prisoner just yet. You carried off all the honor of the day, said Ulick. I had no notion you had such an arm. Why, you swung me round like a tomcat, or— and he exemplified the exploit upon Morris, and was well buffeted. That's a little Irish blarney to propitiate me, laughed Mr. Kendall, who certainly was in unusual spirits after his execution and rescue by proxy. But you won't escape prison fare. There's no doubt who was the heroine of the day, added Sophy. How one envies her. What, your little governess friend? Said Ulick. Yes, she did show superior wit when the rest of the world stood gaping around. It was admirable, just like Genevieve's tenderness and dexterity, said Albinia. I dare say she is doing everything for the poor little fellow. Yes, admirable, said Mr. Kendall, but you all behaved very creditably, ladies. Ay, said Albinia, not to scream is what a man thinks the climax of excellence in a woman. It is generally all that is required, said Mr. Kendall. I don't know what I should have done if poor Lucy had been there. Thereupon the ladies went upstairs, Morris following Sophy to extract a full account of the skirmish. The imp probably had an instinct that she would think more of what redounded to Ulick O'More's glory than of what would be edifying to his own infant mind. It was doubtful how long it would be before Guy Fawkes would arrive at his proper standing in the little Ox opinion, after the honour of an auto da fe in company with papa. Mr. Hope escorted Genevieve home, and was kept to dinner. They narrated that they had found the public house open, and the bar full of noisy runaways. The burns were dreadful, but the surgeon did not think they would be fatal, and the child had held Genevieve's hand throughout the dressing, and seemed so unwilling to part with her that she had promised to come again the next day, and had been thanked gratefully. There seemed no positive want of comforts, and there was every hope that all would do well. Genevieve looked pale after the scene she had gone through, and could not readily persuade herself to eat, still less rally her spirits to talk, but she managed to avoid observation at dinner time, and afterwards a rest on the sofa restored her. She evidently felt, as she said, that this was coming home, and her exquisite gift of tact making her perceive that she was to be at ease and on an equality, she assumed her position without giving her friends the embarrassment of installing her, and Mr. Hope was in such a state of transparent admiration that Albinia could not help 2 or 3 times noiselessly clapping her hands under the table, and secretly thanking the rioters and their tag-rag and bobtail for having provided a home for little Genevieve Durand. There was indeed a pang as she thought of Gilbert, but she believed that Genevieve's heart had never been really touched, and was still fresh and open. She thought she might make Mr. Kendall and Sophy equally magnanimous. Perhaps by that time Sophy would be too happy to have leisure to be hurt, and she had little fear but that Mr. Kendall's good sense would conquer his jealousy for his son, though it might cost him something. Two lovers to befriend at once, two desirable attachments to foster. There was glory. Not that Albinia fulfilled her mission to a great extent. Shamefacedness always restrained her, and she had not Emily's gift for making opportunities. Indeed, when she did her best, so perversely bashful were the parties, that the wrong pairs resorted together, the two who could talk being driven into conversation by the silence of the others. Of Mr. Hope's sentiments there could be no doubt. He was fairly carried off his feet by the absorption of the passion, which was doubly engrossing because all ladies had hitherto appeared to him as beings with whom conversation was an impossible duty. But after all he had heard of Miss Durrant, he might, as a judicious man, select her for an excellent parsoness, and as a young man fall vehemently in love. Nothing could be more evident to the lookers on, but Albinia could not satisfy herself whether Genevieve had any suspicion. She was not very young, knew something of the world, and was acute and observing, but, on the other hand, she had made it a principle never to admit the thought of courtship, and she might not be sufficiently acquainted with the habits of the individual to be sensible of the symptomatic alteration. She had begged the Dusitoys to make her leisure profitable, and spent much of her time upon the schools, on her little patient in Tibbs Alley, and in going about among the poor. She visited her old shopkeeper friends, and drank tea with them much oftener than gratified Mr. Kendall, talking so openly of the pleasure of seeing them again, that Albinia sometimes thought the blood of the O'Moores was a little chafed. "There," said Genevieve, completing a housewife filled with needles ready threaded, "I wonder whether the omnibus is too Protestant to leave a parcel at the convent." "I don't think its scruples of conscience would withstand sixpence," said Albinia. "You might post it for less than that," said Sophy. "Don't you know," said Ulick O'More, who was playing with the little auk in the window, "that the feminine mind loves expedients? It would be less commonplace to confide the parcel to the conductor than merely let him receive it as a guard of the mail bag and servant of the public." "Exactly," laughed Genevieve. "Think of the moral influence of being selected as bearer of a token of tenderness to my aunt on her fate, instead of being treated as a mere machine, devoid of human sympathies. Sophy, where were we reading of a nation which gives the simplest transaction the air of a little romance?" said Ulick. "And I have heard of a nation which denudes every action of sentiment, and leaves you the tree without the leaves," was Genevieve's retort. "That misses fire, Miss Durrant. My nation does everything by the soul, nothing by mechanism. When they do it, that's a defiance. You must deprive the conductor of the moral influence, whether as a man or machine, and entrust the parcel to me. That would be like chartering a steamer to send home a Chinese puzzle. No, indeed, I must go to Hadminster. Bear me witness, Sophy, Miss Goldsmith wants me to talk to the house agent. Mind, if you miss St. Lucodia's day, you will miss my aunt's fate." Mr. O'More succeeded in carrying off the little parcel. The next morning, as the ladies were descending the hill, a hurried step came after them, and the curate said, in an abrupt, rapid manner, "I beg your pardon, I was going to Hadminster. Could I do anything for you?" "Nothing, thank you," said Albinia, at whom he looked. "Did I not hear Miss Durrant had some work to send her aunt to day?" "How did you know that, Mr. Hope?" exclaimed Genevieve. I heard something pass when someone was admiring your work," he said, not looking at her, "and this, I think, is St. Leucodia's day. I am very much obliged to you for remembering it, but I have sent my little parcel otherwise, so I need not trouble you. Oh, how stupid in me! I am very sorry. I beg your pardon." And he hurried off, looking as if very sorry were not a mere matter of course. Poor man, thought Albinia, I dare say he has reckoned on it all this time, and hunted out St. Leucodia in Alban Butler, and then tried to screw up his courage all yesterday. Ulick has managed to traverse a romance, but perhaps it is just as well, for what would be the effect on the public of Mr. Hope in that coat being seen ringing at the convent door? "Well, Miss Durrant," said Ulick, entering the drawing room in the winter twilight, "here is evidence for you. You have actually penetrated the convent and seen my aunt? Impossible! And yet this penciled note is her own dear writing." "You don't mean that you really were let in?" cried Sophy. "I entered quite legitimately, I assure you. It was all luck. I'd just been putting up at the Crown, when what should I see in a sort of trance, staring right into the inn yard, but as jolly looking a priest as ever held a station. And it's a long since I've seen the like of you," says he, aloud to himself. "Is it the car?" says I. "Sure it is," says he. "I've not laid my eyes on so elegant a vehicle since I left County Tyrone." "Mr. O'Hara," exclaimed Genevieve, "and I'm mistaken if you're not the master of it," he goes on, "taking the measure of me all over," continued Ulick, putting on his drollest brogue. You see, he had too much manners to say that such a personable young gentleman, speaking such correct English, could be no other than an Irishman. So I made my bow, and said the car and I were both from County Galway, and we were straight as good friends as if we'd hunted together at Ballymacilty. To be sure, he was a little taken aback when he found I was one of the Protestant branch of the O'Moores, but a countryman is a countryman in a barbarous land, and he asked me to call upon him, and offered to do me any service in his power. "I am sure he would. He is the kindest old gentleman I know," exclaimed Genevieve. "He always used to bring me barley sugar drops when I was a little girl, and it was he who found out our poor old Biddy in distress at Hedminster, and sent her to live with us." "Indeed, then I owe him another debt of gratitude. In fact, he told me that one of his flock, meaning Biddy, had spoken to him honourably of me. Well, said I, the greatest service you could do me, sir, would be to introduce me to Mademoiselle Belmarch. I have a young lady's commission for her. From my little Genevieve, he said, the darling that she is. Did you leave the child well? And so when I said it was a present for her saint's day, and that your heart was set on it, but, Mr. O'More, I never did set my heart on your seeing her. Well, well, you would have done if you'd known there had been any chance of it. Besides, your heart was set on her getting the work, and how could I make sure of that unless I gave it into her own hand? I wouldn't have put it into Mr. O'Hara's snuffy pocket to hinder myself from being bankrupt. Then he took you in. So he did, like an honest Irishman as he was. He rang at the bell and spoke to the portress, and had me into the parlour and sent up for the lady, and I have seldom spent a pleasanter hall hour. Mademoiselle Belmarch bade me tell you that she would write fuller thanks to you another day, and that her eyes would thank you every night. Was her cold gone? Did she seem well, the dear aunt? Genevieve was really grateful, and had many questions to ask about her aunt, which met with detailed answers. "By the by," said Ulick, I met Mr. Hope in the street as I was coming away. I offered him a lift, but he said he was not coming home till late. I wonder what he is doing." Albinia and Sophy exchanged glances, and had almost said, "Poor Mr. Hope." It was very hard that the good fortune and mere good nature of an indifferent person should push him where the quiet curate so much wished to be. Albinia would have liked to have had either a little impudence or a little tact to enable her to give a hint to Ulick to be less officious. St. Locadia's feast was the 9th of December. 3 days after, Genevieve received a letter which made her change countenance and hurry to her own room, whence she did not emerge till luncheon time. In the late afternoon there was a knock at the drawing-room door, and Mr. Dusitoy said, "Can I speak with you a minute, Mrs. Kendall?" Dreading ill news of Lucy, she hurried to the morning-room with him. "Fanny said I had better speak to you. This poor fellow is in a dreadful state." "Algernon?" "No, indeed. Poor Hope. What has possessed the girl?" "Genevieve has not refused him?" "Did you not know it? I found him in his rooms as white as a sheet. I asked what was the matter. He begged me to let him go away for one Sunday and find him a substitute. I saw how it was, and at the first word he broke down and told me." "Was this to-day?" "Yes. What can the silly little puss be thinking of to put an excellent fellow like that to so much pain? Going about it in such an admirable way, too, writing to old Mamselle first, and getting a letter from her which he sends with his own, and promising to guarantee her £50 a year out of his own pocket. I should like to know what that little Jenny means by it. I gave her credit for more sense. Perhaps she thinks, under the circumstances of her coming here within the year. Ah, very proper, very pretty of her. I never thought of that. I suppose I have your permission to tell Hope." "I believe all the town knew it," said Albinia. "Yes, he need not be downhearted. He has only to be patient, and he will like her the better for it. After all, though he is as good a man as breathes, he cannot be Gilbert, and it will be a great relief to him. I'll tell him to put all his fancies about O'More out of his head." "Most decidedly," said Albinia, "nothing can be greater nonsense. Tell him by no means to go away, for when she finds that our feelings are not hurt, and has become used to the idea, I have every hope that she will be able to form anew. Ay, ay, poor Gilbert would have wished it himself. It is very good of you, Mrs. Kendall. I will put the poor fellow in spirits again. Did you hear whether she gave any reasons?" "Oh, I don't know, something about her birth and station, but that stuff. She's a perfect lady, and much more. And he is only a bookseller's son." "True, and though it might be awkward to have the parson's father-in-law cutting capers if he lived in the same town, yet being dead these 15 or 18 years, where's the damage?" "Was that all? I fancy that she said she never meant to marry, but that's all nonsense. She is the very girl that ought, and I hope you will talk to her and bring her to reason. There's not a couple in the whole place that I should be so glad to marry as those two." Albinia endeavoured to discuss the matter with Genevieve that night when they went upstairs. It was not easy to do, for Genevieve seemed resolved to wish her good night outside her door, but she made her entrance, and putting her arm round her little friend's waist, said, "Am I very much in your way, my dear? I thought you might want a little help, or at least a little talk." "Oh, Mrs. Kendall, I hoped you did not know," and her eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Dusitoy told me, my dear. Poor Mr. Hope's distress betrayed him, and Mr. Dusitoy was anxious I should—" Genevieve did not let her finish, but exclaiming, I did not expect this from you, madam, gave way to a shower of tears. My dear child, do we not all feel you the more one with ourselves for this reluctance? Said Albinia, caressing her fondly. It shall not be forced upon you any more till you can bear it. Till, exclaimed Genevieve, alarmed. Oh, do not say that. Do not hold out false hopes. I never shall. I do not think you are a fair judge as yet, my dear. I think I am, said Genevieve slowly. I must not let you love me on false pretenses. Dearest Mrs. Kendall, I do not think it is all for his sake, but indeed, though I must esteem Mr. Hope, I do not believe I could ever feel for him as, then breaking off, I pray you with all my heart, dearest friend, never to speak to me of marriage. I am the little governess, and while heaven gives me strength to work for my aunt, and you let me call this my home, I am content, I am blessed. Oh, do not disturb and unsettle me. So imploringly did she speak, that she obliterated all thought of the prudent arguments with which Albinia had come stored. It was no time for them. There was no possibility of endeavouring to dethrone the memory of her own Gilbert, and her impulse was far more to agree that no one else could ever be loved than to argue in favour of a new attachment. She was proud of Gilbert for being thus recollected, and doubly pleased with the widowed heart. Nor was it till the first effect of Genevieve's tears had passed off that she began to reflect that the idea might become familiar, and that romance, having been abundantly satisfied by the constancy of the Lancer, sober esteem might be the basis of very happy married affection. Mr. Hope did not go away, but he shrank into himself and grew more timid than ever, and it was through the Dusitoys that Albinia learnt that he was much consoled, and intended to wait patiently. He had written to Mademoiselle Belmarch, who had been extremely disappointed, and continued to believe that so excellent and well brought up a young girl as her niece would not resist her wishes with regard to a young pastor so respectable. Sophy, when made aware of what was going on, did not smile or shed a tear, only a strange whiteness came across her face. She made a commonplace remark with a visible effort, nor was she quite herself for some time. It was as if the reference to her brother had stirred up the old wound. Genevieve seemed to have been impelled to manifest her determination of resuming her occupation. She wrote letters vigorously, answered advertisements, and in spite of the united protest of her friends, advertised herself as a young person of French extraction, but a member of the Church of England, accustomed to tuition, and competent to instruct in French, Italian, music, and all the ordinary branches of education. Address G.C.D., Mr. Richardson's bookseller, Bayford. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of The Young Stepmother by Charlotte Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Miss Goldsmith went to spend Christmas with an old friend, leaving Ulick more liberty than he had enjoyed for a long time. He used it a good deal at Willow Lawn, and was there, of course, on Christmas Day. After dinner, the decoration of the church was under discussion. The Bayford neighborhood was unpropitious to holly, and Sophy and Genevieve had hardly ever seen any, except that Genevieve remembered the sooty bits sold in London. Something passed about sending for a specimen from Fairmead, but Albinia said that would not answer, for her brother's children were in despair at the absence of berries, and had ransacked Colonel Bury's plantations in vain. The next day, about twilight, Albinia and Sophie were arranging some Christmas gifts for the old women in the morning room. Genevieve was to come and help them on her return from the child in Tibbs Alley. "Oh, here she comes, up the garden," said Sophy, who was by the window. Presently Albinia heard a strange sound as of Titan breath, and looking up saw Sophy deathly pale, with her eyes fixed on the window. In terror she flew to her side, but Sophy spoke not. She only clutched her hand with fingers cold and tight as iron, and gazed with dilated eyes. Albinia looked. Ulick had come up from the house. There was a scarlet berried spray in Genevieve's hand, which she was trying to make him take again. His face was all pleading and imploring. She turned hastily from him, and they saw her cheek glowing with crimson. She tried to force back the holly spray, but her hand was caught. He was kissing it. No, she had rent it away. She had fled in through the conservatory. They heard the doors. She had rushed up to her own room. Sophy's grasp grew more rigid. She panted for breath. My child," said Albinia, throwing her arms round her, expecting her to faint. Oh, could I have imagined such treason? Her eyes flashed, and her frame quivered with indignation. He shall never come into this house again. "Mamma, hush," said Sophy, releasing herself from her embrace, and keeping her body upright, though obliged to seat herself on the nearest chair. "It is not treason," she said slowly, as though her mouth were parched. "Contemptible fickleness," burst out Albinia, but Sophy implored silence by a gesture. "No," she said, "it was a dream, a degrading, humiliating dream, but it is over. There is no degradation except to the base trifler I once thought better things of." "He has not trifled," said Sophy. "Wait, hush." There was a composure about her that awed Albinia, who stood watching in suspense while she went to the bedroom, drank some water, cooled her brow, pushed back her hair, and sitting down again in the same collected manner, which gave her almost a look of majesty, she said, "Promise me, mamma, that all shall go on as if this folly had never crossed our minds." I can't, Sophy," said Albinia, in the greatest agitation. "I can't know that you have been shamefully used." "Then you will lead papa to break his promise to Genevieve, and lower me not only in my own eyes, but in those of every one." He knew he little knew that he was bringing her here to destroy his daughter's happiness. So that was why she held off from Mr. Hope, cried Albinia, burning with such indignation that on some one she must expend it. But a tirade against the artfulness of the little French witch was cut off short by an authoritative, "Don't, mamma. You are unjust. How can she help being lovable? He had no business to know whether she was or not." "You are wrong, mamma. The absurdity was in thinking I ever was so." "Very little absurd," said Albinia, twining her arms round Sophy. "Don't make me silly," hastily said Sophy, her voice trembling for a moment. "I want to tell you all about it, and you will see that no one is to blame. The perception has been growing on me for a long time, but I was weak enough to indulge in the dream. It was very sweet." There again she struggled not to break down, gaining the victory, and went on. "I don't think I should have dared to imagine it myself, but I saw others thought it, who knew more. I knew the incredible was sometimes true, and every little kindness he did. Oh, how foolish, as if he could help doing kindnesses. My better sense told me he did not really distinguish me, but there was something that would feed upon every word and look. Then last year I was wakened by the caricature business. That opened my eyes, for no one who had that in him would have turned my sister into derision. I was sullen then and proud, and when humanity and compassion brought him to me in my distress, oh, why could not I have been reasonable and not have selfishly fed on what I thought was revived? He had no right, began Albinia fiercely. He could neither help saving Morris nor speaking comfort and support when he found me exhausted and sinking. It was I who was the foolish creature. I hate myself. Well, you know how it has been. I like to believe it was the thing. I knew he cared less for me then, but I thought it was always so between men and women, and that I would not have petty distrusts. But when she came, I saw what the true feeling is. I saw that he felt when she came into the room. I saw how he heard her words and missed mine. I saw, Sophy collected herself and spoke quietly and distinctly. I saw his love, and that it had never been for me. There was a pause. Albinia could not bear to look, speak, or move. Sophy's words carried conviction that swept away her sandcastle. "Now, mamma," said Sophy earnestly, "you own that he has not been false or fickle." "If he has not, he has disregarded the choicest jewel that lay in his way," said Albinia, with some sharpness. "But he has not been that," persisted Sophy. "Well, no, I suppose not. And no one can be less to blame than Genevieve. Little flirt, I've no patience with her." "She can't help her manners," repeated Sophy. "I feel them so much more charming than mine every moment. She will make him so happy." "What are you talking of, Sophy? He must be mad, if he is in earnest. A man of his family pride, his father will never listen to it for a moment." "I don't know what his father may do," said Sophy, "but I know what I pray and entreat we may do, and that is, do our utmost to make this come to good." "Sophy, don't ask it. I could not. I know you could not." "There is no loss of esteem. I honor him as I always did," said Sophy. "Yes, the more since I see it was all for papa and the right, all unselfish, on that 5th of November. Some day I shall have worn out the selfishness." She kept her hand tightly pressed on her heart as she spoke, and Albinia exclaimed, "You shall not see it. You overrate your strength. It is my business to prevent you." "Think, mamma," said Sophy, rising in her earnestness. "Here is a homeless orphan, whom you have taught to love you, whom papa has brought here as to a home, and for Gilbert's sake. Is it fair, innocent exemplary as she is, to turn against her because she is engaging and I am not, to cut her off from us, drive her away to the first situation that offers, be it what it may, and with that thought aching and throbbing in her heart? Oh, mamma, would that be mercy or justice?" "You are not asking to have it encouraged in the very house with you." "I do not see how else it is to be," said Sophy. "Let him go after her, if there's anything in it but Irish folly and French coquetry." "How, mamma? Where? When she is governess in some strange place? How could he leave his business? How could she attend to him? Oh, mamma, you used to be kind. How can you wish to put two people you love so much to such misery?" "Because I can't put one whom I love better than both, and who deserves it, to greater misery," said Albinia, embracing her. "Then do not put me to the misery of being ungenerous, and the shame of having my folly suspected." Albinia would have argued still, but the children came in. Sophy went away, and there was no possibility of a tete-a-tete. How strange it was to have such a tumult of feeling within, and know that the same must be tenfold multiplied in the hearts of those two girls, and yet go through all the domestic conventionalities, each wearing a mask of commonplace ease, as though nothing had happened. Genevieve had, Albania suspected, been crying excessively, for there was that effaced, annihilated appearance that tears produced on her, but otherwise she did her part in answering her host, who was very fond of her and always made her an object of attention. Albinia found herself betraying more abstraction. She was so anxiously watching Sophy, who acquitted herself best of all, had kept tears from her eyes, talked more than usual, and looked brilliant, with a bright color dyeing her cheeks. She was evidently sustained by eagerness to obtain her generous purpose, and did not yet realize the price. The spray of holly was lying as if it had been tossed in vexation upon the marble slab in the hall. Albinia from the stairs saw Sophy take it up, and waited to see what she would do with it. The Sophy she had once known would have dashed it into the flames, and then have repented. No, Sophy held it tenderly, and looked at the glossy leaves and coral fruit with no angry eye. She even raised it to her lips, but it was to pierce with one of the long prickles, till her brow drew together at the smart, and the blood started. Then she began to mount the stairs, and meeting Albinia, said quietly, "I was going to take this to Genevieve's room. It is empty now, but perhaps you had better take care of it for her out of sight. It will be her greatest treasure to-morrow." Mr. Kendall read aloud as usual, but who of his audience attended? Certainly not Albinia. She sat with her head bent over her work, revolving the history of these last 2 years, and trying to collect herself after the sudden shock and the angry feelings of disappointment that surged within, in much need of an object of wrath. Alas! who could be that object but that blind, warm-hearted, impulsive Mistress Albinia Kendall? She saw plain enough, now it was too late, that there had not been a shadow of sentiment in that lively, confiding Irishman, used to intimacy with a herd of cousins, and viewing all connections as cousins. She remembered his conversation with her brother, and her brother's impression. She thought of the unloverly-like dread of ague in Emily's moonlight walk. She recalled the many occasions when she had thought him remiss, but she could not but acquit him of any designed flirtation, any dangerous tenderness, or what Mademoiselle Belmarch would call légèreté. He could not be reserved. He was naturally free and open, and how could she have put such a construction on his frankness, when Sophy herself had long been gradually arriving at a conviction of the truth? It was a comfort at least to remember that it had not been the fabrication of her own brain. She had respectable authority for the idea, and she trusted to its prompter to participate in her indignation, argue Ulig out of so poor a match, and at least put a decided veto upon Sophy's Spartan magnanimity, Sophy's health and feelings being the subject, she sometimes thought, which concerned him above all. Ah, but the evil had not been his doing. He had but gossiped out a pleasant conjecture to his wife as a trustworthy helpmeet. What business had she to go and telegraph that conjecture, with her significant eyes, to the very last person who ought to have shared it, and then to have kept up the mischief by believing it herself, and acting, looking, and arranging as on a certainty implied, though not expressed? Mrs. Osborne or Mrs. Drury might have spoken more broadly. They could not have acted worse, thought she to herself. The notion may never have been suggested. Sophy might have simply enjoyed these years of intimacy, and even if her heart had been touched, it would have been unconsciously, and the pain and shame of unrequited affection have merely been a slight sense of neglect. a small dreariness, lost in eagerness for the happiness of both friends. Now, 2 years of love that she had been allowed to imagine, returned and sanctioned, and love with the depth and force of Sophy's whole nature, the shame of having loved unasked, the misery of having lived in a delusion, how would they act upon a being of her morbid tendency, frail constitution, and proud spirit? As Albania thought of the passive endurance of the last year's estrangement, her heart sank within her. Illness, brain fever, permanent ill health, and crushed spirits, nay, death itself she augured, and all her own fault. The last and best of Edmund's children, so cruelly and deeply wounded, and by her folly. She longed to throw herself at his feet and ask his pardon. But it was Sophy's secret as well as hers, and how could womanhood betray that unrequited love? At least, she thought, for noble Sophy's sake, she would not raise a finger to hinder the marriage. But as to forwarding it or promoting the courtship under Sophy's very eyes, that would be like murdering her outright, and she would join Mr. Kendall with all her might in removing their daughter from the trying spectacle. Talk of Aunt Maria! This trouble was 10,000 times worse. Albinia began to watch the timepiece, longing to have the evening over, that she might prepare Mr. Kendall. It ended at last, and Genevieve took up her candle, bade good night, and disappeared. Sophy lingered, till coming forward to her father as he stood by the fire, she said, "Papa, did you not promise that Genevieve should be another daughter?" "I wish she would be, my dear," said Mr. Kendall, "but she is too independent, and your mamma thinks she would consider it as a mere farce to call her little Albinia's governess. But if you can persuade her—" "What I want you to do, papa, is to promise that she shall be married from this house as her home, and that you will fit her out as you did Lucy." "Ha! Is she beginning to relent?" "No, papa, it will be Ulick O'More." "You don't mean it!" exclaimed Mr. Kendall, more taken by surprise than perhaps he had ever been, and looking at his wife, who was standing dismayed, yet admiring the gallant girl who had forestalled her precautions. Obliged to speak, she said, "I am afraid so. Sophy and I witnessed a scene to-day." "Afraid?" said Mr. Kendall. "I see no reason to be afraid if Ulick likes it. They are two of the most agreeable and best people that ever fell in my way, and I shall be delighted if they can arrange it, for they are perfectly suited to each other." "But such a match!" exclaimed Albinia. "As to that, a sensible economical wife will be worth more to him than an expensive one, with however large a fortune. And for the family pride, I am glad the lad has more sense than I feared. He has a full right to please himself, having won the place he has, and he may make his father consent. He wants a wife. Nothing else will keep him from running headlong into speculation for want of something to do. Yes, I see what you are thinking of, my dear, but you know we could not wish her, as you said yourself, never to form another attachment." "But here," sighed Albinia, the ground knocked away from under her, yet still clinging to the last possible form of murmur. "It will cost us something," said Mr. Kendall, "but no more than we will cheerfully bear, for the sake of one who has such claims upon us, and it will be amply repaid by having such a pair of friends settled close to us." "Then you will, papa," said Sophy. "Will do what, my dear?" "Treat her as you did Lucy, papa." "And with much more pleasure, and far more hope, than when we fitted out poor Lucy," said Mr. Kendall. Sophy thanked him and said good night, and the look which accompanied her kiss to her stepmother was a binding over to secrecy and non-interference. "Is she gone?" said Mr. Kendall, who had been musing over his last words. Gone to tell her friend, I suppose. I wanted to ask what this scene was. Oh, said Albinia, it was in the garden. We saw it from the window. Only he brought her a bit of holly and was trying to kiss her hand. Strong premises, certainly. How did she receive the advance? She would not listen, but made her escape. Then matters are not in such a state of progress as for me to congratulate her. I suppose that you ladies are the best judges whether he may not meet with the same fate as poor Hope. Sophy seems to take it for granted that he will not. Irishman as he is, he must be pretty secure of his ground before coming to such strong measures. Well, I hope we may hear no more of brow ague. But, with sudden recollection, I thought, Albinia, you fancied he had some inclination for Sophy. Was it not a good wife to suppress the "you did"? If she could merrily have said, "You told me so," it would have been all very well, but her mood would admit of nothing but a grave and guarded answer, "We did fancy so, but I am convinced it was entirely without reason." That superior smile at her lively imagination was more than human nature could bear, without the poor relief of an entreaty that he would not sit meditating, and go to sleep in his chair. Albinia thought she had recovered equanimity during her night's rest, but in the midst of her morning toilet Sophy hurried in, exclaiming, "She'll go away. She is writing letters and packing." And she answered, "Well, what do you want me to do? You don't imagine that I can rush into her room and lay hands on her. She will not go upon a wishing carpet. It will be time to interfere when we know more of the matter." Sophy looked blank and vanished, and Albinia felt excessively vexed at having visited on the chief sufferer her universal crossness with all mankind. She knew she had only spoken common sense, but that made it doubly hateful. And yet she could not but wish Miss Durrant anywhere out of sight, and Mr. O'More on the top of the hill of Howth. At breakfast, Sophy's looks betrayed nothing to the uninitiated, though Albinia detected a feverish restlessness and covert impatience, and judged that her sleep had been little. Genevieve's had perhaps been less, for she was very sallow, with sunken eyes, and her face looked half its usual size. But Albinia could not easily have compassion on the poor little unwitting traitress, even when she began, "Dear Mrs. Kendall, will you excuse me if I take a sudden leave? I find it will answer best for me to accept Mrs. Elwood's invitation. I can then present myself to any lady who may wish to see me, and as I promise my aunt another visit, I had better go to Hadminster by the 3 o'clock omnibus." Albinia was thankful for the loud opposition, which drowned the faint reluctance of her own. Mr. Kendall insisting that she should not leave them, little Aught coaxing her, and Morris exclaiming, "If the ladies want her, let them come after her. One always goes to see a horse." "I'm not so well worth the trouble, Morris. I know Ulick O'More would come in to see you when all the piebalds for the show were going by." "Some day you will come to the same good taste," said his father, to lessen the general confusion. "See a lady instead of a piebald? Never!" cried Morris with indignation that made the most preoccupied laugh, under cover of which Genevieve effected a retreat. Sophy looked imploringly at Albinia. Albinia was moving, but not with alacrity, and Mr. Kendall was saying, "I do not understand all this," when, scarcely pausing to knock, Ulick opened the door, cheeks and eyes betraying scarcely repressed eagerness. "What? Where?" he stammered, as if even his words were startled away. "Is not Miss Durrant well?" "She was here just this moment," said Mr. Kendall. "I will go and see for her," said Sophy. "Come, children." Whether Sophie's powers over herself or over Genevieve would avail was an anxious marvel, but it did not last a moment, for Morris came cluttering down to say that Genevieve was gone out into the town. In such a moment! She must have snatched up her bonnet and fled one way, while Ulick entered by the other. He made one step forward, exclaiming, "Where is she gone?" Then pausing, broke out, "Mrs. Kendall, you must make her give me a hearing, or I shall go mad." "A hearing?" repeated Mrs. Kendall, with slight malice. "Yes. Why, don't you know? So your time has come, Ulick, has it?" said Mr. Kendall. "Well, and I were worse than an old ledger if it had not, when she was before me. Make her listen to me, Mrs. Kendall. If she do not, I shall never do any more good in this world." "I should have thought," said Albinia, "that an Irishman would be at no loss for making opportunities." "You don't know, Mrs. Kendall. She is so fenced in with scruples, humility, I know not what, that she will not so much as hear me out. I'm not such a blockhead as to think myself worthy of her, but I do think, if she would only listen to me, I might stand a chance. And she runs off as if she thought it a sin to hear a word from my mouth." "It is very honorable to her," said Mr. Kendall. "Very honorable to her," replied Ulick, "but cruelly hard upon me. I think, too," continued Mr. Kendall, stimulated thereto by his lady's severely prudent looks, "that you ought, granting Miss Durrant to be, as I well know her to be, one of the most excellent persons who ever lived, still to count the cost of opening such an affair. It is not fair upon a woman to bring her into a situation where disappointments may arise which neither may be able to bear." "Do you mean my family, Mr. Kendall? Trust me for getting consent from home. You will write my father a letter saying what you said just now. Mrs. Kendall will write another to my mother, and I'll just let them see my heart is set on it, and they'll not hold out." "Could you bear to see her looked down on?" said Albinia. "Ha!" he cried, with flashing eyes. "No, believe me, Mrs. Kendall, the O'Moores have too much gentle blood to do like that, even if she were one whom any one could scorn. Why, what is my mother herself but a goldsmith by birth? And I'd like to see who would cast it up to any of the family that she was not as noble as an O'More. And Genevieve herself, isn't every look and every movement full of the purest gentility her father's land can show? I dare say, once accepted, the O'Moores would heartily receive her. But here, in this place, there are some might think it told against you, and might make her uncomfortable. What care I? I've lived and thriven under Bayford's scorn many a day, and for her, oh, I defy anything so base to wound a heart so high as hers, and with me to protect her." "And you can afford it," said Mr. Kendall. "Remember she has her aunt to maintain." "I can," said Ulick. "I have gone over it all again and again," and recalling his man of business nature, he demonstrated that even at present he was well able to support Mademoiselle Belmarch, as well as to begin housekeeping, and that there was every reason to believe that his wider and more intelligent system of management would continue to increase his income. "Well, Ulick," said Mr. Kendall at last, "I wish you success with all my heart, and esteem you for a choice so entirely founded upon the qualities most certain to ensure happiness." "You don't mean to say that she has not the most glorious eyes, the most enchanting figure?" exclaimed Ulick, affronted at the compliment that seemed to aver that Genevieve's external charms were not equal to her sterling merit. Mr. Kendall and Albinia laughed, and the former excused himself, not quite to the lover's satisfaction, by declaring the lady much more attractive than many regularly handsome people, but he added that what he meant was that he was sure the attachment was built upon a sound foundation. Then he entreated that Mrs. Kendall would persuade her to listen to him, for she had fled from him ever since his betrayal of his sentiments, till he was half crazed, and had been walking up and down his room all night. He should do something distracted, if not relieved from suspense, before night. And Mr. Kendall got rid of him in the midst of his transports, and turning to Albinia said, "We must settle this as fast as possible, or he will lose his head and get into a scrape. I do not like such wild behavior. It is not dignified." "It is only temperament," said Mr. Kendall. "Will you speak to her?" "Yes, whenever she comes in." "I suspect she has gone out on purpose. Could you not go to find her at the school, or wherever she is likely to be?" "I don't know where to find her. I cannot give up the children's lessons. Nothing hurts Morris so much as irregularity." He made no answer, but his look of disappointment excited her to observe to herself that she supposed he expected her to run all over the town without ordering dinner first, and she wondered how he would like that. Presently she heard him go out at the front door, and felt some contrition. She had not the heart to seek Sophy to report progress, and did not see her till about 11 o'clock, when she came in hastily with her bonnet on, asking, "Well, mamma?" "Where have you been, Sophy?" "To school," she said. "Has anything happened?" "We have had it out, and I am to speak to her when she comes in," said Albinia, glad as perhaps was Sophy of the enigmatical form to which Morris's presence restrained the communication. Sophy went away, but presently returning and taking up her work, but with eyes that betrayed how she was listening. But there was so entire an apparent absence of personal suffering, that Albinia began to discharge the weight from her mind, and believe that the sentiment had been altogether imaginary even on Sophy's side, and the whole a marvellous figment of her own. At last Mr. Kendall's foot was heard. Sophy started up, and sat down again. He came upstairs, and his face was all smiles. "Well," he said, "I don't think she will go by the 3 o'clock omnibus." "You have spoken to her?" cried Albinia in compunction. "Has Morris finished? Then go out, my boy, for the present." "Well," said Albinia interrogatively, and Sophy laid down her work, and crossed one hand over the other on her knees, and leant back as though to hinder visible tremor. "Yes," he said, going on with what had been deferred till Morris was gone. "I thought it hard on him, and as I was going to speak to Edwards, I asked if she were at the Union, where I found her, taking leave of the old women, and giving them little packets of snuff and small presents, chiefly her own work, I am sure. I took her with me into the fields, and persuaded her at last to talk it over with me. Poor little thing, I never saw a more high-minded, conscientious spirit. She was very unhappy about it, and said she knew it was all her unfortunate manner. She wished to be guarded, but a little excitement and conversation always turned her head, and she entreated me not to hinder her going back to a schoolroom, out of the way of every one. I told her that she must not blame herself for being more than usually agreeable, but she would not listen, and I could hardly bring her to attend to what I said of young O'More. Poor girl, I believe she was running away from her own heart." "You have prevented her," cried Sophy. "At least I have induced her to hear his arguments. I told her my opinion of him, which was hardly needed, and what I thought might have more weight, that he has earned the right to please himself, and that I believed she would be better for him than riches. She repeated several times, "Not now," and "Not here," and I found that she was shocked at the idea of the subject being brought before us. I was obliged to tell her that nothing would gratify any of us so much, and that this was the time to fulfill her promise of considering me as a father. "Oh, thank you," murmured Sophy. So finally I convinced her that she owed Ulick a hearing, and I think she felt that to hear was to yield. She had certainly been feeling that flight was the only measure, and between her dread of entrapping him and of hurting our feelings, had persuaded herself it was her duty. The last thing she did was to catch hold of me as I was going, and ask if he knew what her father was. "I dare say it has been the first thing she has said to him," said Albinia. "She is a noble little creature. But what have you done with them now?" "I brought him to her in the parsonage garden. I believe they are walking in the lanes," said Mr. Kendall, much gratified with his morning's work. "She deserves him," said Sophy, and then her eyes became set, as if looking into far distance. The walk in the lanes had not ended by luncheon time, and an afternoon loaded with callers was oppressive, but Sophy kept up well. At last, in the twilight, the door was heard to open, and Genevieve came in alone. They listened, and knew she must have run up to her own room. And what did it portend? Albinia must be the one to go and see. So after a due interval she went up and knocked. Genevieve opened the door and threw herself into her arms. "Dear Mrs. Kendall, oh, have I done wrong? I am so very happy, and I cannot help it." Albinia kissed her, and assured her she had done nothing to repent of. "I am so glad you think so. I never dreamt such happiness could be meant for me, and I am afraid lest I should have been selfish and wrong and bring trouble on him. We have been all saying you deserve him." "Oh, no, no! So good, so noble, so heroic as he is, how could he think of the poor little French teacher? And he will pay my aunts £50. I told him all, and he knew it before, and yet he loves me. Oh, why are people so very good to me?" "I could easily find an answer to that question," said Albinia. "Where is he, my dear?" "He is gone home. I would not come into the town with him. It is nothing, you know. No one must hear of it, for he must be free unless his parents consent, and I know they never can," she said, shaking her head sadly. "But even then I shall have one secret of happiness. I shall know what has been. But oh, Mrs. Kendall, let me go away." "Go away now!" exclaimed Albinia. "Yes, it cannot be, here in this house. Oh, it is outraging your kindness." "No," said Albinia, "it is but letting us fulfil a very precious charge." Genevieve's tears flowed, as she said, "Such goodness! Mr. Kendall spoke to me in this way in the morning, when he was more than kind and patient than I can express. But tell me, dearest madam, tell me candidly, is my remaining here the cause of any secret pain to him?" With regard to him, Albinia could answer sincerely that it was a gratification, and Genevieve owned that she should be glad to await the letters from Ireland, which she tried to persuade herself she believed would put an end to everything except the precious remembrance. Sophy came in with some tea. She had recollected that Genevieve had wandered all day without any bodily sustenance. There was great sweetness in the quiet, grave manner in which she bent over her friend and kissed her brow. All she said was, "Papa had gone to fetch him to dinner. Genevieve, you must let me do your hair." It was in Genevieve's eyes an astonishing fancy, and Albinia said, "Come away now, my dear. She must have a thorough rest after such a day." Genevieve looked too much excited for rest, but that was the more reason for leaving her to herself, and besides, it was so uncomfortable not to be able to be kind enough. However, when people are happy, a little kindness goes a great way, and there was a subdued lustre like a glory in her eyes when she came downstairs, with the holly leaves and berries glistening in her hair, the first ornament she had ever worn there. "It was Sophy's doing," she said. "Naughty girl, she tried to take me by surprise. She would not let me look in the glass, but I guessed. And oh, she was wounding her poor hand so sadly." "I must thank her," said Ulick, looking ecstatic. "Why does she not come down?" As she did not appear, Albinia went up, doubtful if it were wise, yet too uneasy not to go in quest of her. It was startling to have so faint an answer on knocking, and on entering the room she saw Sophy lying on her bed upon her back, with her arms by her sides, with a ghastly whiteness on her features. Scarcely a pulse could be felt, and her hands were icy cold. Her voice sank to nothing, her eyelids scarcely raised, as if the strain of the day had exhausted all vital warmth or energy, and her purpose accomplished, annihilation was succeeding. Much terrified, Albinia would have hurried in search of remedies, but she raised her hand imploringly and murmured, "Please don't. I'm not faint. I'm not ill. If you would only let me be still." Albinia teased her so far as to cover her with warmed shawls and force on her a stimulant. She shut her eyes, but presently opened them to say, "Please go." She was so often unable to appear at dinner that no observation was made, and it was to be feared that her absence was chiefly regretted by the lovers, because it prevented them from sitting on the same side of the table. Always frank and unrestrained, Ulick made his felicity so apparent that Albinia had no toleration for him, and not much for the amusement it afforded Mr. Kendall. She would have approved of her husband much more if he had put her into a great quandary by anxious inquiries what was the matter with his daughter, instead of that careless, "Oh, you are going up to Sophy. I hope she will be able to come down to tea," when she left him on guard over the children and the lovers. "So it is with woman's martyrdoms," she said to herself as she walked upstairs, chewing the cud of all the commonplaces by which women have, of late years, flattered themselves and been flattered. "But at any rate I'll have her out of sight of all their absurdity. It is enough to kill her." Sophy hardly stirred at her entrance, but there was less ghastliness about her, and as Albinia sat down she did not remove her hand, and turned slightly round, so as to lose that strange corpse-like attitude of repose. "You are not so cold, dearest," said Albinia. "Have you slept?" "I think not." "Are you better? Have you been comfortable?" "Oh, yes." Then with a pause, "Yes, it was like being nothing." "You were not faint, I hope?" "No, only lying still. Don't you know the comfort of not thinking or feeling?" "Yes, this has been far too much for you. You have done enough now, my generous Sophy." "Not generous. One can't give away what one never had." "I think it more gracious to yield without jealousy or bitterness." "Only not quite base," said Sophy. Then presently, turning on her pillow, as though more willing to converse, she said, "I am glad it was not last year. We had troubles enough then." "Not for that, because I should have been base then, and hated myself for it all the time." "That you never could have been," cried Albinia. But, my dear, you must let me contrive for you. I would not betray you for all the world, but the sight of these two is more than you ought to undergo. I would not send Genevieve away, but you must go from home." "I don't think I shall be cross," said poor Sophy simply. "I should be ashamed." "Cross! It is I who am cross, because I am to blame. But, dearest, think if you are keeping up out of pride, that will never, never do." "I do not believe it is pride," said Sophy meekly. "At least I hope not. I feel humiliated enough, and I think it may be a sort of shame, as well as consideration for them, that would make me wish that no difference should be made. Do you not think we may let things go on?" she said, in so humble a manner that it brought Albinia's tears, and a kiss was the only answer. "Please tell me," said Sophy, "for I don't want to deceive myself." "I am sure I am no judge," cried Albinia, "after the dreadful mischief I have done." "The mischief was in me," said Sophy, "or you could not have done it. I saw it all when I was laying awake last night, and how it began, or rather it was before I can remember exactly. I always had craving after something, a yearning for something to fix myself on, and after I grew to read and look out into the world, I thought it must be that. And when I knew I was ugly and disagreeable, I brooded and brooded, and only in my better moments tried to be satisfied with you and papa and the children. And the all satisfying, Sophy dear. I tried, I did, but it was duty, not heart. I used to fancy what might be if I shot out into beauty and grace, not admiration, but to have that one thing to lean on. You see, it was all worldly, and only submissive by fits. Generally, it was cross repining, yielding because I could not help it. And so, when the fancy came, the throne was ready made, empty, swept, and garnished, for the idol. I won't talk of all that time, but I don't believe even Genevieve, though she knows she may, can dwell upon the thought as I did, in just the way to bring punishment. And so I thought, by and by, at the caricature time, that I was punished. I looked into the fallacy when I got over the temper and the pride, and I saw it all clear, and owned I was rightly served, for it had been an earthly aim and an idol worship. Well, the foolish hope came back again, but indeed, I think I was the better for all the chastening. I had seen grandmamma die, I was fresh from hearing of Gilbert, and I did feel as I never had done before that God was first. I don't believe that feeling had passed, though the folly came back, and made me feel glad to love all the world. There were gleams of religion's thought. She spoke with difficulty, but her face had a strange beauty, that taught me how, if I was more good, there could be a fullness of joy that all the rest flowed out from. And so when misgivings came, and I saw at times how little he could care for me, oh, it was pain enough, but not the worst sort. And yet, I don't know. She turned away and hid her face on the pillow. It was agony, though still, as she had said, not the worst, untempered by faith or resignation. What a history of that apparently cold, sullen, impassive spirit! What an unlocking of pent-up mysteries! "It has been blessed to you," said Albinia affectionately. "My dear, we always thought your character one that wanted the softening of such an attachment. Perhaps that made me wrongly eager for it, and ready to imagine where I ought not. I think it did soften you, but if you had not conquered what was earthly and exaggerated in it, how it would be hardening and poisoning you now." "I hope I may have," sighed Sophy, as if she were doubtful. "Then will you not listen to me? You have done nobly so far, and I know your feelings will be right in the main. But do you think you can bear the perpetual irritation of being neglected and seeing what I must call rather a parade of his preference? I think it would be the best cure, said Sophy. It would make me feel it real, and I could be glad to see them, so happy. I don't know how to judge. I don't know whether it be right for you to have him always before your mind. He would be so all the more while I was away with nothing to do, said Sophy. Fancy might be worse than fact. You don't know how I used to forget the nonsense when he had been 10 minutes in the room, because it just starved out. Now, when it will be a sin, I believe that strength will be given me to root it out. Her look grew determined, but she gasped for breath. And your bodily strength, my dear? If I should be ill, then it would be natural to go away, said Sophy, smiling. But I don't think I shall be. This is only the end of my fever to see it settled. Now I am thankful, and my heart has left off throbbing when I am still. I shall be all right tomorrow. I hope so, but you must spare yourself. Besides, she added, one of the worst parts has been that, in the fancy that a change was to come, I have gone about everything in an unsettled way. And now I want to begin again at my duties, my readings and parish matters as my life's work, steadily and in earnest. Not violently, not to drive care away. I have tried that once, and will not again. You will arrange for me, and I will do just as you tell me." And she raised her eyes with the most deep and earnest gaze of confiding love that had ever greeted Albinia from any of the three. "I'll try not to grieve you, for you are too sorry for me." And she threw her arms round her neck. "Oh, mamma, nothing is so bad when you help me to bear it." Tears fell fast at this precious effusion from the deep, sincere heart, at the moment when Albinia herself was most guilty in her own eyes. Embraces were her only answer, and how fervent! "And, mamma," whispered Sophy, "if you could only let me have some small part of teaching little Albinia." A trotting of small feet and a call of mamma was heard. The little maiden was come with her good nights, and in one moment Albinia had lifted her into her sister's arms, where she was devoured with kisses, returning them with interest, and with many a fondling, "Poor Sophy," and "Dear Sophy." When the last fond good night had passed, and the little one had gone away to her nest, Sophy said in a soft, natural, unconstrained voice, "I am very sleepy. If you will be so kind as to send up my tea, I will go to bed. Thank you. Good night." That was the redrawing of the curtain of reserve, the resignation of sentiment, the resumption of common life. The romance of Sophia Kendall's early life had ended when she wounded her fingers in wreathing Genevieve's hair. Her next romance might be on behalf of her beautiful little sister. Albinia was cured of her fretfulness towards the new order of events, and her admiration of Sophy carried her through all that was yet to come. It was the easier since Sophy did not insist on unreasonable self-martyrdoms, and in her gratitude for being allowed her purpose in the main, was submissive in detail, and had mercy on her own powers of endurance, not inflicting the sight of the lovers on herself more than was needful, and not struggling with the languor that was a good reason for remaining much upstairs. She worked and read, but without overdoing anything, and wisely undertook a French translation, as likely to occupy her attention without forcing her to overexert her powers. Not that she said so. She carefully avoided all reference to her feelings, and Albinia could almost have deemed the whole a dream, excepting for the occasional detection of a mournful fixed gaze, which was instantaneously winked away as soon as Sophy herself became aware of it. Her trouble, though of a kind proverbially the most hardening and exacerbating, had an entirely contrary tendency on her. The rigidity and harsh judgment which had betokened her states of morbid depression since she had outgrown the sulky form had passed away, and she had been right in predicting that she should not be cross, for she had become sweet and gentle towards all. Her voice was pitched more softly, and though she looked ill and had lost the bloom which had once given her a sort of beauty, her eyes had a meek softness that made them finer than when they wore the stern, steady glance that used to make poor Gilbert quail. Her strength came not from pride, but from grace, and to her disappointment was more softening than even the prosperous affection that Albinia had imagined. It was love, not earthly, but heavenly. If her father had been less busy, her pale cheek might have alarmed him, but he was very much taken up with builders and estimates, with persuading some of the superfluous population to emigrate, and arranging where they should go, and while she kept the family hours and habits, he did not notice lesser indications of flagging spirits, or if he did, he was wise and thought the cause had better not be put into words. Albinia had brought herself to give fair sympathy to the lovers, and when once she had begun, it was easy to go on, not as ardently as if she had never indulged in her folly, but enough to gratify two such happy and grateful people, who wanted no one but each other, and agreed in nothing better than in thinking her a sort of guardian angel to them both. Genevieve had assuredly never given her heart to Gilbert, and it was ready in all the freshness of maidenly bliss to meet the manly ardor of Ulick O'More. He was almost overpoweringly demonstrative and eager, now and then making game of himself, but yet not able to help rushing down to Willow Lawn 10 or 12 times a day, just to satisfy himself that his treasure was there, and if he could not meet with her, catching hold of Mr. or Mrs. Kendall to rave till they drove him back to his business. Such glee danced in his eyes, there was such suppressed joyousness in his countenance, and his step was so much nearer a dance than a walk, that his very air well nigh betrayed what was to be an absolute secret, till there had been an answer from Ballymacilty, until which time Genevieve would not rest in the hope of a happy future, nor give up her fears that she had not brought pain upon him. In he came at last, so exulting and so grateful that it was a shock to discover that the kindest letter and fullest consent in the world meant his father's supposing he would do as he pleased, as long as he asked for nothing, it was no concern of his. It was discovered, by Ulick's delight, that he had expected to have a battle, and Albinia was scandalized, but Mr. Kendall told her it somewhat depended on what manner of father it was, whether an independent son could defer implicitly to his judgment, and though principle might withhold Ulick from flat disobedience, he might not scruple at extorting reluctant consent. Besides, his mother, whom he honored far more really, had written, not without disappointment, but with full confidence in his ability to judge for himself. Mr. Kendall and Mr. Ferrars both wrote warmly in Genevieve's praise, and certainly her footing at Willow Lawn was the one point d'appui in bringing round the O'More family, so that, as Ulick truly said, it was Mrs. Kendall whom he had to thank for the blessing of his life. Had poor Miss Goldsmith's description of Miss Durrant's birth parentage, and education been the only one that had reached Ballymacilty, a prohibition would assuredly have been issued, but he was left sufficiently free to satisfy his own conscience, and before Genevieve had surmounted half her scruples, the whole town was ringing with the news, though no one could guess how it had got wind. To be sure, the Dusitoys had been put into a state of rapture, and poor Mr. Hope had had the fatal stroke administered to him. He looked so like a ghost that Mr. Dusitoy contrived to release him at once, whereupon he went to try the most unwholesome curacy he could find, with serious intentions of exchanging his living for it. But he fortunately became so severely and helplessly ill there that he was pretty well cured of his mental fever, and quite content to go to his heath and do his work there like the humble and earnest man that he was, perhaps all the better for having been personally taught something more than could be gained from books and colleges. Miss Goldsmith was the most to be pitied. She would not hear a word from her nephew, refused to go near Willow Lawn, packed up her goods, and went to Bath, where Ulick promised the much distressed Genevieve that she would yet relent. Genevieve was somewhat consoled by the increasing cordiality of the Irish letters, and was carried along by the extreme delight and triumph of her good old aunt. By some wonderful exertion of Irish faculties, Ulick succeeded in bringing Mademoiselle to Bayford in his jaunting car, when she laughed, wept, sobbed, and embraced, in a bewilderment of transport, pronounced the trousseau worthy of an angel of the ancient regime, warmed Genevieve against expecting amour to continue instead of amity, and carried home conversation for the nuns for the rest of their lives. That trousseau was Sophy's special charge, and most jealous was she that it should in no respect fall short of that outfit for Lucy's, for which she had cared so little. A hard task it was to make Genevieve accept what Lucy had exacted, but Sophy held the purse strings, wrote the orders, and had her own way. She and her little sister were the only available bridesmaids, since Rosa Moore was not allowed to come, having made up her mind to this from the first. When the subject came forward, her open, cheerful look and manner were meant to show that she was not afraid, and that her wish was real. Freely resigning him, why should she not be glad to join in calling down the blessing? The wedding was fixed for Easter week, which fell early, and Albinia cast about for some excuse for taking her away afterwards. An opportune occasion offered. Sir William Ferrars wrote from the East to propose the Kendals meeting him in Italy and travelling home together. He was longing, he said, to see something of his sister, and he should enjoy sight-seeing 10 times as much with a clever man like her husband to tell him all about it. Mr. Ferrars strongly seconded the project. Clever fellow, not a word did he say, but did not he know the secrets of that household as well or better than the inmates themselves? Now that Tibbs Alley was deserted and plans fixed, architect and clerk of the works chosen, March winds ready for building, and underground work to begin at once, what could be more prudent than for the inhabitants of Willow Lawn to remove far from the disturbance of ancient drains and no drains, and betake themselves to a purer atmosphere? Mr. Kendall was of no use as a superintendent, and needed no persuasion to flee from the chance of typhus. As to the children, the time had come early when Morris's whole nature cried out for school. He was much improved, and there was that real principle within him which made it not unsafe to launch him in a world where he might meet with more useful trials than those of home. Child as he was, his propensities were too much limited by the bounds of the town house and garden, and the society of his sisters, one too old and one too young to serve as tomboys. He needed to meet his match and work his way. Albinia felt that school had become his element, and Mr. Kendall only wanted to make his education the reverse of Gilbert's, so he ran nearly frantic between the real jacket and the promise of going to school with Willie. He knew not, though his mother mourned over the coming heart sickness and mother sickness of the first night, the first Sunday, the first trouble. It was sure to be very severe in one of such strong and affectionate feeling, but it must come sooner or later, and the better that it should be conquered while home was still a paradise. Fairmead was not so far from his destination, but that his uncle would keep an eye on him, and Winifred held out a hope that if the tour lasted long enough, he should bring out both boys to spend their holidays with them. A very good Winifred. Albinia the less was to become a traveller, for the good reason that nobody could or would go without her. They were to go direct to Lucy, who was at Naples with a second boy, and pining for home faces and home comforts, the inducement which perhaps worked most strongly to make Sophy like the journey, for since her delusion had been swept away, a doubly deep and intense feeling had sprung up towards her own only sister, whose foibles had been forgotten in long separation. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of The Young Stepmother by Charlotte Yonge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. The lake of Lucerne lay blue and dark in the shade of the mountains, on whose summits the evening sunshine was fast mounting, peak after peak falling into purple shadow. There was a small inlet where a stream rushed down between the hills, and on the green slope stood a chalet, the rich red of the roof contrasting with the green pasture. A little boat was moored to a stump near the land, and in it sat Sophia Kendall, her hat by her side, listening to and answering merrily the chatter of Morris, who tumbled about in the boat, often causing it severe shocks, while he inspected the cut of the small sail which she was making for the miniature specimen, which he often tried in the clear, cold water. Farther off, a little up the hillside, Willie Ferrars was holding the hand of the chestnut-curled, black-eyed fairy, little Auk, who was impressing him by her fluency in two languages at once, according as she chattered to him in English or in French to a picturesque peasant, her great ally, who was mowing his flowery crop of hay, glancing like an illumination, with an undercurrent of brilliant blossoms among the grass. Wandering with slow conversational pace up and down the beach of the lake were Mr. Kendall and Sir William Ferrars, conversing as usual, the soldier with quick, alert comprehension, wide observation, and clearness of mind, which jumped to the very points to which the scholars deeply read and long digested arguments were bringing him more slowly. On a projecting point sat Albinia, her fair hair shaded under her dark hat, beneath which her English complexion glowed fresh and youthful, as with flat tin box by her side and block sketch-book on her knee, she mixed and she painted, and tried to catch those purples and those blues with unabated ardor. Suddenly a great trailing frond of mountain fern came over the brim of her hat from behind. "Oh, Morris, don't!" Then looking up and laughing, "Oh, it is you, is it? I knew Morris would do, whichever it might be. but see, the other is quite out of mischief, unless he should upset Sophy into the lake. He can't do that, the rope is too short. But is not he very much improved? He has quite lost his imperious manner towards her. Nothing like school for making a boy behave himself to his sisters. Exactly, as I learnt by experience long ago. I am glad William did not see him till he had learnt to be agreeable. How he does admire him! You'll never make anything of that sketch. The mountain is humpbacked, and the face of that precipice is exactly like Colonel Bury, and he caught up a pencil to help out the resemblance with nostril and eyebrow. For shame, to be so mischievous, such a great boy as you. Well, we all came out here to be great boys, didn't we? I am sure you look a dozen years younger than when I last saw you, Mrs. Grandmother. By the by, it was a bold stroke to encumber yourself with that brat. What's become of him? Susan has taken him in asleep. You see, Morris, I really could not help it. The poor little thing was so sickly, and had never thriven. But when they were a little while embracing air, Lucy was longing to have him in England, and his father, who never believes in anything but what he likes, would not see it. And what with those Italian servants, and Algernon hunting Lucy about as he does, it would have been the death of him. Susan, good creature, had taken to him of her own accord the moment we came to Naples, and could not have borne to leave him. And, you know, the auk is almost off her hands now, and Sophy, who first proposed it, or I am sure I should never have ventured, is delighted to do anything for either of them, and always has her little sister in her room. As to papa, he was very good, and the child is very little in his way, and has been quite well ever since we have been in this delicious air. How did you get Lucy to consent? Poor dear, it was a melancholy business, but she had so often been in alarm about him, and had suffered so much from having to leave him with people she did not trust, that she caught at the proposal before she fairly contemplated what the parting would be. And when she did, Algernon was too glad to be relieved from him not to keep her up to it. But it won't do to think of it. She has her baby, who is healthier, and if they remain abroad, I suspect we shall keep little Ralph altogether. He is a dear little fellow, and Sophy has so taken possession of Albinia that I should be quite lost if I did not set up a private child. What do you call him? I thought his name was Belraven. I could not possibly call him so, and his aunts, by way of adding to the aviary, made him Ralph the Raven. So I mean it to stick by him. I believe papa has forgotten the other dreadful fact, for I caught him giving his name as Ralph Cavendish Dusitoy. How the dear vicar of Bayford will devour him, and what work I shall have to keep him from being spoilt. Then you think they will remain abroad? Algernon hates England, and all his habits are foreign. Did he make himself tolerably agreeable? He really did. One could bear to be patronized by one's host better than by one's guest, and he was in wholesome awe of William. Besides, he is really at home in Italy, and knows his way about so well that he is not a bad cicerone. I am sure Sophy could never have done either Vesuvius or Pompeii without his arrangements, and as long as he had a victim for his catalogue raisonné, he was very placable and obliging. That was all extracts, so it really was not so bad. So you were satisfied. He has a bad lot about him, that's the worst. Polish counts, disreputable artists and poets, any one who has a spurious sort of fame, and knows how to flatter him. Edmund was terribly disgusted. Very bad for his wife. You see, she is a thorough-going mother and no linguist. She really is improved, and I like her more really than ever I could, poor dear. I believe her head was once quite turned, and that he influenced her entirely and made her forget everything else. But she has a heart, though not much of a head, and sorrow and illness and children have brought it out. And she is what a very woman becomes, I suppose, if there be any good in her, an abstract wife and mother. Was it not dangerous to take away her child? There was another, you know, and it was to save his life. The duties clashed and were destroying all comfort. How does he behave to her? I believe she has all the love he has to spare. He is proud of her and dresses her up and has endless portraits of her. Luckily, she keeps her beauty. She is more refined and has more expression. One could sometimes cry to watch her, and he likes to have her with him and to discourse to her, but without the slightest perception or consideration of what she would prefer, and with no notion of sacrificing anything for her or the children. I know she is afraid of him. I have seen her tremble if there were any chance of his being annoyed, and she would not object to any plan of his if it were to cost her life. I believe it would be misery to her, but I think she would resist. Ay, she did resist, and in vain, for the sake of her child. Does her affection hold out, do you think? Oh, yes, the spaniel and walnut tree love, which is in us all, and doubly in the very woman. It is very beautiful. She is so proud of him and of her gilded slavery, and so unconsciously submissive and patient. But it is a harder life, I guess, than we can see. I am sure it must be, for every bit of personal vanity and levity is worn out of her. She only goes out to satisfy him, dresses to please his eye, and talks with her eye seeking round for him, in dread of being rebuked for mistakes or bad French. And for the rest, her joy is to be left in peace with little Algernon upon her lap. Yes, I hope living in all womanly virtues may be training and compensation. But the saddest part of the affair is that he does not think it fashionable to be religious, and she has not moral courage to make open resistance. May it come, fervently. It is strange how much more real and good a creature she is now than when at home in the midst of all external observances. Yet it cannot be right. She surely ought to make more stand. But it is too literally being afraid to say her soul is her own, for she is unhappy. She does the utmost she can without offending him, and feels it as she never did before. "There is no judging," said Morris, as his sister looked at him with eyes full of sorrowful yearning. "No one can tell where are the boundaries of the two duties. Poor girl, she has put herself into a state of temptation and trial, but she may be shielded by her exercise of so much that is simply good, and her womanly qualities may become not idolatry, but a training in reaching higher." "May it be so, indeed," said Albinia. "Oh, Morris, how I once disdained being told I was too young, and how true it was! What visions I had about those three, and what failures have resulted! Your visions may have vanished, but you did your work faithfully, and it has not been fruitless. I, in shipwrecked lives, mischiefs wherever I meant to do best. Why, I let even my own Morris grow unmanageable while I was nursing poor grandmamma. The voluntary duty choked the natural one, and yet, interrupted her brother, that was no error. Oh no, I would not have done it for anything, nor do I think the boy the worse for it. I may venture now on saying he was intolerable, and it hastened school. But though your rein was loose, you never let it fall, and maybe the self conquest was the best thing for him. If you had neglected him wilfully for your own pleasure, nothing but harm could have been expected. As you were absorbed by a sacred act of duty, I believe it will all be made up to you in your son. Oh, Morris, if I might trust so, I believe I am doubly set on that boy doing well, because his father must not have another pang. I think he knows that. I do not imagine that he will ever be carried astray by high spirits, but I am sure that he has the strength, honor, and sweetness that are the elements of greatness. Nothing we did so changed him as the loss of his brother. Oh, Morris, there was my most ardent wish to do right, and my most fatal mistake and greatest success. Gilbert owed everything to you. Had I but silenced my foolish pride, he might have been safe in India now. We do not know how safe he might be. I did indeed think it a pity your influence led the other way, but things might have been far worse. If you made some blunders, your love and your earnestness were working on that susceptible nature, and what better hope can we wish to have than what rested with us at Malta? What better influence than has remained with Morris or with Fred? Albinia had not yet learnt to talk calmly of Gilbert's last hours, so she put this aside, and smiling through her tears, said, "Ah, when Emily writes to Sophy that their boy is to have his name, since they can wish nothing better for him than to be like him." The past vision always a little above what is visible. Hardly. Emily and Fred are as proud of each other as two peacocks, and well they may be, for stoop down, 'tis an intense secret, but do you know the effect of their Sebastopol den? Eh? Lieutenant General Sir William Ferrars is going out in quest of Emily's younger sister. You ridiculous child, that's a trick of yours. No, indeed. William was surprised into a moment of confidence walking home in the moonlight from the Colosseum. And vrai militaire, he has begun at the right end, and written to Mr. Kinnaird to take leave to come and try his luck. And cool as he looks, I believe he would rather prepare for Inkerman. Well, if he be not making a fool of himself at his time of life, I am sure I am very glad. Time of life! He's but 3 years older than Edmund. If you are not more respectful, we shall have to go out to Canada to countenance him. I shall be rejoiced to see him with a home and finding life beyond his profession, but I had rather he had known more of her. That's what he never would do. He cannot talk to a young lady. Why, he admires Lucy a great deal more than Sophy. Well, judging by the recent brides, I think if it had been me, I should have gone in search of Mrs. Ulig O'More's younger sister. Ah, I wanted particularly to hear of your visit at the bank. You had luncheon there, I think. How do they get on? It is the most charming menage in the world. She looks very graceful and elegant, and keeps him in great order, and is just the wife he wanted. A little sauciness and piquancy to spur him up at one time and restrain him at another, with the real ballast that both have, makes such a perfect compound that it is only too delightful to see anything so happy and so good in this world. They both seem to have such vivid enjoyment of life. Pray, has any one called on Genevieve, though she would dispense with it? Oh yes, Brian O'More spent a fortnight there, and see what a mustache will do. The Osbornes, Drurys, Wolfes, and company all dubbed themselves dear Mrs. O'More's dearest friends. I found a circle of them round her, and when I observed that Brian was not half such a handsome fellow as his brother, you should see how I was scorned. I hope Brian may not play his father's game again. Do you know how she was received in Ireland? The whole clan adore her. Ulick, with his Anglo-Saxon truthfulness, got into serious scrapes for endeavoring to disabuse them of the notion that she was sole heiress of the ancient Marquisate of Durand. I believe Connell was ready to call Ulick out for disrespect to his own wife, and she was happy there, very much amused and treated like a queen, charmed with his mother and great friends with Rose. They have brought Redmond home to lick him into shape, and I believe Rose is to come and be tamed. Always Ulick's wish, said Albania, as her eye fixed upon Sophy. And her brother, with perhaps too obvious a connection of ideas, said, "Is she quite strong?" "Very well," said Albania. "I am glad we brought her. The sight of beauty has been like a new existence. I saw it on her brow in calmness and rest, the first evening of the Bay of Naples. It has seemed to soothe and elevate her, though all in her own silent way. But watch her as she sits with her face to those mountains. Hear her voice, and you will feel that the presence of grandeur and beauty is repose and happiness to her. And I think the remembrance will always be so, even in a workaday Bayford. Yes, because remembrance of such glory connects with hope of future glory. And it is a rest from human frets and passions. She has taken to botany too, and I am glad, for I think those studies that draw one off from men's works and thoughts do most good to the weary, self-occupied brain, and the children are a delight to her. Sophy is your greatest work." "Not mine," cried Albinia, "the noblest by nature, the dearest, the most generous." "Great qualities, but they would have been only wretched, self-praying torments, but for the softening of your affection," said Morris. "Dear, dear friend and sister and child in one," cried Albinia. And then meeting her brother's eyes, she said, "Yes, you know to the full how noble she is, and how—" "I can guess how imprudent a young stepmother can be," said Morris, smiling. "It is very strange. I don't know how to be thankful enough for it. But really her spirits have been more equal, her temper more even than ever it had been, and that just when I thought my folly had been most ruinous. Yes, Albinia, after all, it is more than man can hope or expect to make no blunders, and I do verily believe that while an earnest will saves us, by God's grace, from wilful sins, the effects of the inadvertences that teach us our secret faults will not be fatal. And while we are indeed honestly and faithfully doing our best, though we are truly unprofitable servants, that our lapses through infirmity will be compensated, both in the training of our own character and the results upon others. If we are indeed faithfully doing our best, repeated Albinia. End of chapter 31, and of The Young Stepmother, or A Chronicle of Mistakes, by Charlotte Yonge.